Chapter 2182. The first battle ended with Martial Saint Qinyu winning. This result was within the expectations of many martial saints. Everyone was surprised that Martial Saint Tianchong could last half an hour against Martial Saint Qinyu before being defeated. This was already a great improvement. In the square of sky-gazing city, hundreds of thousands of cultivators were discussing animatedly, still reminiscing about the exciting battle from before. At this moment the second battle began. A middle-aged man in a sapphire-blue robe with rings all over his fingers walked out of the crowd. This man was Martial Saint Tianxia. He was 7 feet tall and had an ordinary appearance. He was fat like a rich man in the secular world and had a mustache. Walking to the light gate in the middle of the round plate, he turned to look at Lu Baishuang and revealed a cold smile. Then he stepped into the light gate and appeared in the void. After entering the void, his every move was displayed in front of hundreds of thousands of martial artists. He suddenly changed his appearance. His expression was gentle and kind. Ji Tianxing looked at Lu Baishuang and said, "Don't be nervous. Just do your best. Don't worry about the result." Lu Baishuang looked at him with gratitude. She stepped out of the crowd and stepped into the light gate. Swoosh. A golden light flashed and she appeared in the void. She stood 10 miles away from Martial Saint Tianxia. The two looked at each other and bowed. Martial Saint Tianxia smiled and said, "Martial Saint Baishuang, I didn't expect to meet you in the first round. I know that you have been defeated by me for 2 consecutive rounds and can only be ranked 6. You are very unwilling. Now is the time for you to wash away your shame. Don't miss it." Lu Baishuang said expressionlessly, "I don't need you to say more. I will do my best." Martial Saint Tianxia smiled and said, "That's good. I will also do my best to show my respect to you. However, swords have no eyes. You have to be careful. If you can't withstand it, you should admit defeat early. Otherwise, you will be hurt by me and our friendship will be damaged." On the surface he appeared to be very amiable, but his words had a hidden meaning. However, the hundreds of thousands of martial artists in sky-gazing city square could only see his expression, but not hear his voice. Lu Baishuang's face was filled with disgust as he frowned. Unwilling to speak with him any further, he coldly shouted, "Enough nonsense, take this." As she spoke, she took out a 4-foot-long silver-white scimitar and slashed towards the heaven-heart martial saint with a saber light that could split the heavens and earth. Fleeting frost moon. The 1,000-meter-long silver-white saber light was like a stream of starlight and also like a crescent moon. It emitted a bone-chilling cold chi with boundless power. The heaven-heart martial saint also stopped smiling. He took out a palm-sized black treasure sword and stabbed out 3 fiery red giant swords. Ping ping ping. The red flame greatsword collided with the silver saber light with a deafening boom. The sword radiance and the saber radiance shattered at the same time, turning into millions of fragments that scattered in the void, like fireflies dancing in the sky on a summer night. It was quite beautiful. As soon as the two of them exchanged blows, they used all of their strength, not daring to underestimate their opponent. All kinds of secret techniques and mysterious spells were cast one after another, creating illusions and shadows that covered the sky and the sun. The void within a few hundred miles was lit up by the radiance of Dharma powers. The aftermath of the battle created huge waves and hurricanes in the void, spreading outwards and attacking the white light disk. On the disk, many martial sages were engrossed in the battle and commented from time to time. Not only were the young martial sages surprised and envious of the techniques of Lu Baishuang and the Heaven-Heart martial saint. Even the senior martial sages nodded their heads as they watched, revealing looks of admiration. As expected of the 5th and 6th ranked martial sages, both of them have a deep understanding of the martial way and can use hundreds of Dharma spells to perfection. That's right. Regardless of whether it is the saber technique of Saint Emperor Baishuang or the sword technique of the Heaven-Heart martial saint, they are both perfect and flawless. They can start a sect and teach for thousands of years. From the looks of it, the two of them are equally matched. It will be difficult to determine the winner in a short time. Xianxia martial saint, Granny Yulong and the others all had gratified expressions as they discussed calmly. Wenren Jiuxing, who had always been silent, shook his head and said with a regretful expression, "It looks like it is difficult to determine the winner, but the winner has already been decided." When Yuanjin heard this, he immediately raised his eyebrows and asked with interest, "Oh? Who does Senior Jiuxing think will win?" Wenren Jiuxing did not beat around the bush and said directly, "Of course it will be the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. He looks like he is going all out, but he is actually hiding a secret technique. The winner will be revealed in at most 15 minutes." Yuanjin nodded his head and could not help but smile. He had a higher opinion of Wenren Jiuxing in his heart. This guy has sharp eyes. He can see through the truth. He is indeed capable. Looks like he is more useful than those old guys. I have to test him 2 more times to see if he can take on great responsibilities. Very quickly 15 minutes had passed. The result was just as Wenren Jiuxing had said. Seeing that Lu Baishuang had used up more than half of his Dharma powers, the Heaven Heart Martial Saint did not hold back and used his Dharma spells. Heaven Shocking Sword Rain. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint suddenly shouted coldly. He held the sword with both hands and slashed at Lu Baishuang. Suddenly his body surged with flames that covered the sky, condensing into thousands of flaming swords that pierced towards Lu Baishuang from the sky. Lu Baishuang was already heavily injured and her Dharma powers were also quite weak. She did not have time to dodge and was drowned by the flaming swords. Bang 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 bang. A series of muffled sounds exploded and reverberated in the void platform. Ji Tianxing frowned and a look of worry flashed across his eyes. Zhou Mingqi and Mu Changtian's faces also changed, revealing a look of deep worry. However, they could only worry in their hearts and could not interfere in the battle on the platform. After a long time, the flames that covered the sky dissipated. Lu Baishuang's figure appeared. Her hair was disheveled and her body was covered in blood. She stood in the void platform, panting violently. Her clothes were tattered and the saint's soft armor she wore was also shattered. Blood kept flowing out of her nose and mouth. Especially in front of her chest, there was a bloody hole the size of a bowl. It was clear from front to back and one could vaguely see her heart in her chest. Just a little more and her heart would have been pierced by the sword light and her body would have died on the spot. After suffering such a heavy injury, she no longer had the strength to fight and could only angrily admit defeat. Heaven Heart Martial Saint, you are indeed ruthless. I admit defeat. Her left hand covered her chest and her right hand held the saber as she said in a low and hoarse voice. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint smiled and said with a kind tone, "Sai, it was not my intention to hurt you like this. I've reminded you before but unfortunately, you refused to admit defeat. I can't do anything about it." Chapter 2183. On the white light disk, Zhou Mingqi and Mu Changtian were so angry that their faces turned green. They could not help but curse. Heaven Heart Martial Saint is such a despicable hypocrite. He suddenly unleashed his ultimate move and almost destroyed Holy Emperor Baishuang's physical body. After that he still dares to make sarcastic remarks. Not far away, Yuan Chong and Martial Saint Qingshan looked at Zhou Mingqi and Mu Changtian. "What are the two of you talking about? How can you slander Heaven Heart Martial Saint like this? In the arena, swords and sabers have no eyes. Life and death are common, let alone injuries." Baishuang Martial Saint admitted defeat due to her injuries. She can only blame herself for being weaker. How can she blame others like the two of you? Prince Yuan Chong is right. If everyone is as cowardly as the two of you, why would they participate in the martial arts sparring competition? Hehe, you should feel lucky that Heaven Heart Martial Saint has already shown mercy. Otherwise, Holy Emperor Baishuang's physical body would have been destroyed. Instead of thanking Heaven Heart Martial Saint, you are slandering him. You really don't know what's good for you. Yuan Chong, Martial Saint Qingshan and the rest looked dignified. However, they were laughing coldly in their hearts. Although the other young martial saints of the Heaven and Divine Nation did not say anything, they also had gloating looks on their faces. Zhou Mingqi and Mu Changtian were furious. They wanted to argue with Yuan Chong and the rest. At this moment, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said expressionlessly, "Mingqi Tongan, there's no need to say any more." Zhou Mingqi and Mu Changtian could only keep quiet. They transmitted their voices to Ji Tianxing. "Young Master Ji, they are too much. How can there be such shameless bastards? Looking at their gloating faces, I can't wait to give them a good beating." Ji Tianxing said coldly, "Remember what they said just now. Soon I will make them swallow it all back. The injuries that Baishuang suffered, I will make them suffer 10 times more." His tone was cold and dignified. There was no room for doubt. Zhou Mingqi and Mu Changtian's bodies shook. Their eyes were filled with hope. "Good. With young Master Ji's words we can rest assured. They purposely humiliated Holy Emperor Bai Shuang. They will definitely bully us later. However, with young Master Ji around, we have nothing to fear. Soon Lu Baishuang returned to the white disc. Zhou Mingqi and Mu Changtian hurriedly supported her and returned to Ji Tianxing's side. Her injuries were extremely severe and her aura was extremely weak. Her beautiful face was stained with blood, and her lips were as pale as paper. She looked up at Ji Tianxing and said in a hoarse voice, "In the end, I still let you down." Ji Tianxing shook his head and comforted her. "No, don't think too much. Let me help you heal first." With that, he put his palms together and channeled his magic power, releasing a rich green light into Lu Baishuang's body. The green light flowed through her body and quickly healed her wounds, as well as her broken bone marrow and meridians. The wounds all over her body were healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Seeing this, Zhou Mingqi and Mu Changtian were both relieved and shocked. Ji Tianxing did not have time to care about anything else as he focused on channeling his magic power and chatting with Lu Baishuang. After an hour of treatment, Lu Baishuang's injuries were finally healed. Her body seemed to be in good shape and she seemed to have regained some energy. However, she had only recovered 60% to 70% of her strength, and she still needed a few more years to fully recover. She looked at Ji Tianxing with a complicated expression and said guiltily, "You are about to go up the stage and you shouldn't have helped me heal and wasted your magic power. I didn't want to drag you down, but I have caused you trouble." Ji Tianxing smiled and shook his head. "It's okay. Using some magic power won't affect me from beating those bastards up." "It's good." Lu Baishuang was relieved and the guilt in her heart lessened. The two of them stopped talking and looked at the void in front of them. In the past hour, another 4 pairs of martial sages had gone up the stage to battle. Among them were Taihao Yunqi and Mu Changtian. Taihao Yunqi had been in second place for 3 consecutive sacred gatherings, and his strength was second only to Yuan Chong. His opponent was a low-level martial sage who only had the strength of a level 3 martial sage. The two of them exchanged more than 100 blows, and Taihao Yunqi defeated his opponent easily. As for Mu Changtian, his opponent's strength was on par with his. The two of them fought for 15 minutes before the victor was decided. Mu Changtian had suffered heavy injuries and barely won. At that moment, the 2 martial sages fighting in the void were Yuan Chong and martial sage Ru Feng. Yuan Chong was publicly acknowledged as the number 1 martial sage and his strength was great. Martial sage Ru Feng was only a level 4 martial sage and could not defeat Yuan Chong. However, he was still a martial sage and could not give up before the battle. Even if it was for his dignity, he had to exchange a few blows with Yuan Chong. The two of them exchanged 3 blows and Yuan Chong stood in the void without moving, and martial sage Ru Feng spat out blood and flew back. Martial Saint Ru Feng very tactfully admitted defeat, and even complimented Yuan Chong. Yuan Chong looked disinterested as he turned around and left with an arrogant expression. Next, it was Ji Tianxing's turn to fight martial sage Lu Quebec. Ji Tianxing calmly walked out of the crowd and walked towards the light door in the middle of the round plate. Martial sage Lu Kei was a skinny young man with a thin face, and his aura was sinister. Moreover, he was a martial sage of the Heaven End Holy Kingdom and had once served under Yuan Zhen. He glanced at Ji Tianxing's back, and his mouth curled into a cold smile as he walked out of the crowd. At that moment, Yuan Chong suddenly sent a voice transmission to him. "Lu Kei, remember my words. You must make him pay the price." Lu Kei's footsteps paused and he replied without turning his head, "Fourth Highness, don't worry. Although I am not his match, I will not let him win easily. With those 2 trump cards in hand, even if I lose, I will make him suffer a great loss." Yuan Chong did not say much and he nodded at him. Lu Kei did not hesitate and his figure flashed into the light door, appearing in the void. He and Ji Tianxing were 10 miles apart and they stood in the void facing each other. Neither of them bowed and they did not even exchange basic greetings. Ji Tianxing even glanced at him and he did not even have the interest to talk. Lu Kei was not angry and he said with a cold smile, "Ji Tianxing, I have long heard that you are arrogant and I have seen it for myself these few days. I did not expect that I would have the chance to fight with you. I would like to see how capable you are, and how dare you boast that you are the number 1 genius of the human race." Ji Tianxing glanced at him indifferently and said in a low voice, "You are just a clown." Arrogant. Lu Kei snorted and he immediately took out a golden sword and was about to perform his unique swordsmanship. However, at that moment Ji Tianqing snapped his fingers. Whoosh! All of a sudden, a 1,000-foot-long starry sword appeared in front of Lu Kei out of thin air. His eyes widened and his face was full of horror. Before he could react, the star sword had already struck him head-on. Chapter 2184. Bam! Amidst the deafening noise, Lu Kei was sent flying back by the starry sword. Silver light burst out and dark red blood splattered in the void, mixed with a pile of rags and armor fragments. Lu Kei was sent flying backward for a full 50 miles before he fell into the void, his body twitching and rolling on the ground. This sword had blasted him into a bloody mess, full of cracks and gaps like a broken porcelain bowl. Even his left leg had turned into pieces of bone and flesh, dissipating in the void. His injuries were too horrible to look at. He lay in the void, screaming and unable to stand up. However, compared to the shock and horror in his mind, the pain in his body was nothing. Until now he still couldn't believe how Ji Tianqing did it. He had just drawn his sword and hadn't even used his unique swordsmanship when Ji Tianqing summoned a giant sword and sent him flying. Most importantly, Ji Tianqing didn't even draw his sword. He just snapped his fingers. What kind of swordsmanship was that? Wasn't it too weird? Lu Kei only felt that his consciousness was blurred and his mind was blank. He was a little confused. At this time Ji Tianqing's figure flashed and came in front of him. Looking down at him from above, he said with an indifferent expression, "Admit defeat or die." Lu Kei suddenly sobered up. He raised his blood-stained face and looked at Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing's eyes were cold and indifferent, without any emotion, as if he was looking down at an ant. However, what Lu Kei felt was not humiliation or anger but deep fear. He had no doubt that even if Ji Tianqing didn't have a sword in his hand, he could end his life with just a snap of his fingers. Thinking of this, he said without hesitation, "I admit defeat." He spoke quickly for fear that he would be killed by Ji Tianqing if he hesitated for a moment. When he shouted, "I admit defeat," Ji Tianqing withdrew his cold eyes and turned to leave. The invisible killing intent that enveloped Lu Kei suddenly dissipated. Lu Kei heaved a sigh of relief as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. He hurriedly supported his severely injured body and left the void platform as if he was fleeing. When he returned to the white light disk and flew to the side of Marshal Saint Xianxia and the others, the Marshal Saints were still in shock and astonishment. Not only were more than 20 young Marshal Saints stunned, but even the senior Marshal Saints Yuan Zhen, Qin Zheng and the others were shocked. When everyone came to their senses, Yuan Zhen and Qin Zheng's expressions became very gloomy. They were secretly discussing something with each other. Marshal Saint Qingshan, Chao Ying and the others couldn't help but exclaim and whisper. "What's going on? Is it over?" Lu Kei, Lu Quebec. I think Ji Tianqing didn't even use his sword. He only raised his hand. How could he use such a powerful sword technique? What's terrifying is not the power of the sword light but, so many of us, but we didn't see how Ji Tianqing did it. It seems that we can't underestimate him. He's famous. How can he not have some real skills? Many young martial sages discussed among themselves. Their expressions became grave and cautious. Yuan Chong was silent. His expression was extremely ugly and his eyes were as cold as ice. He stared at Lu Kei, who was covered in blood, and shouted, "Lu Kei, what the hell are you doing? Why didn't you attack?" Lu Kei was also very depressed. He explained weakly, "Your Highness, I've made my move. But his speed is too fast." Yuan Chong was even angrier. He scolded in a sharp tone, "You trash, have you forgotten my instructions? Didn't I ask you to use those 2 trump cards?" Lu Kei was suddenly speechless. He hesitated for a moment and then explained regretfully, "Your Highness, I didn't expect his strength to be so terrifying. Originally, I wanted to exchange a few moves with him, and then take the opportunity to use my trump cards. But I didn't expect, he only used 1 move to seriously injure me. In front of him, I didn't even have the chance to use those 2 trump cards." Yuan Chong was so angry that his body trembled. His eyes were surging with cold light. He couldn't help but curse, "Useless trash. Who do you think you are? You still want to exchange a few moves with him? Forget it, you heal first. I'll settle this with you when we get back." Lu Kei's face was full of fear. He didn't dare to say anything more and quickly sat on the ground to heal his injuries. At this time, Another pair of young martial saints went up to the void platform and started to fight. One of them was Martial Saint Xianxia. His opponent was a young man who was only a rank 4 martial saint. The result of the fight was obvious. Martial Saint Xianxia won, and it only took half an hour. After their fight, a few more martial saints went up to the void platform to fight. Although the fight between the martial saints was very intense, it was very exciting. But because of the previous incident, the crowd didn't care about it. Everyone's attention was placed on the few strongest martial saints, and they were looking forward to the fight between them. For example, Yuan Chong, Taihao Yunqi, Ji Tianqing, and Martial Saint Qingshan. After an hour, the first round of fights finally ended. After this round of fights, 14 of the 28 young martial saints advanced to the next round. The other 14 were defeated in the first round and could only stay on the white light disc to heal their injuries or continue to watch the fights. Every sacred assembly only decided the top 5. There was no need for these defeated martial sages to continue fighting. Yuan Jin announced loudly, "The first round of fights has ended." The list of people who have advanced is as follows. Qin Yu, Tian Xen, Chaoying, Taihao Yunqi, Taihao Jujiu, Mu Chongtian, Yuan Chong, Ji Tianqing, Qing Shan. These 14 martial saints have 2 hours to rest. After 2 hours, the second round of fights will begin. After that, he didn't say anything else and started to communicate with Qin Zheng. It was unknown what he said, but Qin Zheng listened expressionlessly and occasionally glanced at Ji Tianqing. On the other side, Yuan Chong, Martial Saint Qing Shan, and the others had gathered together and were secretly discussing something. It was probably because Ji Tianqing's performance just now had exceeded everyone's expectations and made Yuan Chong and the others feel even more pressured. At this moment, the martial saints of the Heaven and Divine Nation were extremely wary and hostile towards Ji Tianqing. Gathering together for a secret meeting, they were probably discussing how to deal with the situation. Ji Tianqing was well aware of this, but he was too lazy to look at them. He stood in the field with an indifferent expression and silently adjusted his breathing. Lu Baishuang, Zhuo Mingqi, and Mu Chongtian felt that the atmosphere was not right and couldn't help but remind him. Young Master Ji, looking at Yuan Chong and Martial Saint Qingshan's expressions, "I'm afraid they are discussing how to deal with you. Your performance just now was too shocking and gave them a lot of pressure. They are already feeling uneasy." Chapter 2185. Lu Baishuang, Mu Chongtian, and the other 2 were worried for Ji Tianqing. They knew that with Ji Tianqing's terrifying strength he could crush everyone. Even Yuan Chong, who was ranked first, could be defeated by him. But they were still worried. After all, Yuan Chong, Martial Saint Qingshan, and the others were from Heaven and God Nation. They would work together to deal with Ji Tianqing. Next, Ji Tianqing would have to fight a few more battles. If he used up a lot of magic power in every battle, he might even suffer some serious injuries. In the end, it would be difficult to recover and his strength would be greatly reduced. For example, Lu Baishuang might not even be able to defeat a martial saint in his injured state. However, Lu Baishuang and the other 2's advice didn't seem to have much effect. Ji Tianqing just nodded and said calmly, "I know, you don't have to worry. No matter what schemes, in front of absolute strength they are useless." Since he said so, Lu Baishuang and the other 2 naturally couldn't say anything more. Ji Tianqing was also silent. He closed his eyes as if he was resting. But in fact he was communicating with White Dragon using his divine soul. During this period of time, White Dragon had been in the Sword World with Lan Kuan. The 2 of them went to peaceful Earth City and fought with the Xidagarba godly armor in the mountains. As for the final result, it was naturally Lan Kuan who won. He beat up the Xidagarba divine armor and vented his anger. After all, it had White Dragon's help and guidance. Fortunately, the Xidagarba godly armor's skin was thick and its defense was extremely strong. It was fine after being beaten up. Feeling wronged, it went back underground and rested for 10 days to half a month. Then it was as good as new. After this incident, White Dragon and Lan Kuan's relationship was much better. In addition, during this period of time, the White Dragon taught him many things and told him many miraculous legends which made Lan Kuan dizzy. Now Lan Kuan had been brainwashed by him and recognized and respected him. White Dragon's temper had always been restless. When it was tired of playing in the Sword World, it begged Ji Tianqing to come out for a breath of fresh air. "Master, are you currently participating in the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly?" Was he fighting with a bunch of martial saints again? Such an exciting scene, how could you not let your disciple witness your elegance? Don't worry, your disciple will definitely know his place and won't cause you any trouble. You just have to beat up those martial saints, your disciple will cheer for you. The white dragon's voice sounded in Ji Tianxing's mind. Its tone was filled with excitement and anticipation. However, Ji Tianxing refused and said in a calm tone, "Now that my identity has been exposed and the news has spread, the whole world knows about it. It was just that this news was too bizarre, and they still lacked some strong evidence before they were willing to truly believe it. Therefore, I didn't even use the sword of burial of heaven. I won't take it out unless I have no other choice. As for you, you should just stay in the sword world. You are my disciple. Back then you cultivated in the Pillar of Heaven's mountains for many years. I'm afraid that some of the veteran martial sages still remember you." The white dragon was disheartened when it heard that. It was filled with disappointment and frustration. "Master, the sword world is too boring. Your disciple likes to watch you beat up those martial saints. Although some people might recognize me back then, I'm just a remnant soul now. Who would recognize me? I'm not as awe-inspiring and famous as you, Master. I'm not so brilliant that everyone looks up to you. Anyway, Master, please be merciful and let your disciple cheer for you." Ji Tianxing frowned and black lines appeared on his forehead. "What do you mean by cheering? Where did you learn this strange language?" Cough cough. The white dragon pretended to cough twice to hide his embarrassment and hurriedly explained, "I'm used to speaking the language of my hometown." Ji Tianxing considered for a while before agreeing to his request. "It's fine if you want to come out and experience it, but don't talk nonsense." "Ha, thank you, Master." The white dragon was overjoyed and said happily, "Long live Master." A smile flashed across Ji Tianxing's eyes as he secretly opened the sword world. Whoosh! With a flash of white light, the remnant soul of the white dragon flew out and appeared beside Ji Tianxing. It flew around Ji Tianxing twice and landed on his shoulder, looking around excitedly. "Oh, there are so many people. 1, 2, 3. The white dragon's eyes swept across the crowd and counted the number of people seriously. The martial saints beside Ji Tianxing heard the white dragon's voice and immediately turned to look at it. Lu Baishuang, Zhou Mingqi and Mu Changtian were all surprised. They asked curiously, "Young Master Ji, this is? What is this thing? Where did it come from?" The white dragon raised its eyebrows and glared at Zhou Mingqi. It asked unhappily, "Hey, who are you calling a thing? What do you mean it came from? Don't you know how to talk?" Mu Changtian and Zhou Mingqi were stunned. They muttered with strange expressions, "It seems to be young Master Ji's pet? Why is it so fierce?" "Brother Zhou, don't provoke it. It will only make you unhappy." The white dragon was even more depressed. It glared at Zhou Mingqi and Mu Changtian and said in a dignified tone, "Little brother, shut up if you don't know how to talk. Your whole family is a pet." Zhou Mingqi and Mu Changtian frowned and subconsciously wanted to fight back. However, they could only give up because of Ji Tianxing's face. Lu Baishuang looked at the white dragon carefully and said, "Stop talking. It is not young Master Ji's pet. It is a divine soul. It should be young Master Ji's follower." The white dragon's anger dissipated. It looked at Lu Baishuang seriously and said with a gratified smile, "Well, this little sister has good taste and insight. Little sister, I think you are pretty and kind. Standing next to my master, you look like a good match. Why don't you let my master take you as his concubine?" Lu Baishuang was stunned. She stared at the white dragon. Zhou Mingqi and Mu Changtian were also speechless. They looked at the white dragon strangely. Ji Tianxing couldn't help but frown. He stretched out a finger and flicked the white dragon's head. He scolded, "Don't talk nonsense. Did you forget what I told you?" Hee hee. The white dragon smiled awkwardly and nodded, "Master, please don't be angry. I was just joking with this little sister." Lu Baishuang suppressed her anger and ignored the white dragon. She looked at Ji Tianxing seriously and asked, "Young Master Ji, is this your disciple?" "Yes." Ji Tianxing nodded and explained seriously, "I picked him up on the side of the road. Seeing that he was pitiful, I took him as my disciple and taught him. Unfortunately, he was severely injured and almost died. He is only a remnant divine soul. It's all because he was injured too badly and hurt his head. That's why he is a little crazy and always talking nonsense." Chapter 2186. Ji Tianxing's words made Bai Long want to cry, but no tears came out. He looked at Ji Tianxing pitifully and transmitted his voice, "Master, no wonder you agreed to let me out. So, you have already arranged such an identity and background for me? Can't we put it in a better way? Ji Tianxing glanced at him and transmitted his voice. Let's see if you still dare to talk nonsense. I don't dare anymore. Master, please let me off. Bai Long humbly accepted the lesson. Ji Tianxing finally let him off and did not continue to make things difficult for him. Soon 2 hours passed. After the break, Yuan Zhen announced the second round of drawing lots. He waved his hand and shot out 14 jade slips, which flew into the air and danced in the air. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The 14 identity jade slips were quickly disrupted and quietly floated in the air. The mountain-exploring martial saint stepped out of the crowd and said with a solemn expression, "Let me draw the lots for the second round." After saying that, he flicked his 10 fingers and shot out 7 golden lights. Each golden light wrapped around 2 jade slips and flew to him. The drawing of lots was completed quickly. He picked up the jade slips in front of him and announced in a dignified voice, "The second round of drawing lots is completed. The results are as follows. Tian Xen against Ping Hu, Taihao Yunqi against Ru Song, Chao Ying against Mu Chongtian, Qinyue against Ji Tianxing, Qingshan against Taihao Jiujiu Yuanchong against." A total of 14 young martial saints were divided into 7 pairs and went up the stage to fight. After the mountain scouting martial saint finished reading everyone's names, the expressions of the martial saints changed subtly. Many people were looking at their opponents. Some of them were confident in their victory while some of them were cautious and alert. Ji Tianxing's expression was calm without any fluctuations. However, Lu Baishuang, Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Chongtian smiled. The heavens really have eyes. Qinyue actually went up against young Master Ji. That vicious and hateful woman is finally going to fall. Young Master Ji, we all know that you have the demeanor of a grandmaster. You're magnanimous and don't beat up women. However, please don't stick to the rules when it comes to martial Saint Qinyue. Ji Tianxing hadn't said anything yet, but White Dragon had already heard the clues. He looked at Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Chongtian with sparkling eyes and said in a playful tone, "Oh, this is interesting. What happened before? Do you hate martial Saint Qinyue that much?" Zhuo Mingqi quickly explained, "Previously on the heaven-gazing platform, martial Saint Qinyue publicly slandered Holy Emperor Bai Shuang in front of hundreds of thousands of people. Martial Saint Qinyue is a vixen who uses her looks to please others, but she thinks that other women are like her." "I see." Bai Long suddenly came to a realization. He sneered and said, "This little girl is really vicious. She insulted my chastity in public. It's like taking my life. Shizhuan, beat her to death in a moment. You don't need to have tender feelings for the fairer sex and you don't need to give me face." Ji Tianxing, Lu Baishuang and the others frowned and looked at him in confusion. Bai Long was stunned for a moment, then he explained embarrassedly, "Cough cough. I looked around just now and saw that martial Saint Qinyue is quite pretty. Her coquettish manner was a little flirtatious. I was thinking if I should take her in as a servant so that she could wash my feet or massage my body. Since she's so vicious, then forget it. I don't like trash like her." Lu Baishuang, Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Chongtian were all stunned. After regaining their senses, Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Chongtian couldn't help but mutter, "This guy really dares to talk. He's so arrogant, as expected of young Master Ji's disciple. Martial Saint Qinyue seems to be Yuan Chong's little lover, but he wants to take her in as a servant. Such lawlessness, they really come from the same origin." Lu Baishuang thought for a moment and understood. She muttered to herself, "There's really something wrong with his head. He's always talking nonsense." Her voice wasn't loud, but Bai Long heard it clearly. He was at a loss for words. Just as the few of them were muttering, the second round of the competition began. Heaven Heart Martial Saint and Calm Lake Martial Saint stepped onto the void platform. Calm Lake Martial Saint came from the vast God Kingdom. He was a white-haired middle-aged man who was already over 900 years old. This was his last time participating in the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly. In another 50 years he would be 1,000 years old and would no longer be qualified. Although he was a level 5 Martial Saint, he was still no match for Heaven Heart Martial Saint. The two of them exchanged over 1,000 blows in the void. Heaven Heart Martial Saint heavily injured him and he fell into the void. Calm Lake Martial Saint could only admit defeat and retreat with a dejected expression. Immediately after, the second round of the competition began. Taihao Yunqi vs. Martial Saint Ru Song. Taihao Yunqi had been in second place for many consecutive sacred assemblies. His strength and spells were so strong that only Yuanchong could beat him. There was no suspense in this battle and it ended after 15 minutes. Martial Saint Ru Song was defeated and admitted defeat on the spot. Taihao Yunqi won the battle, but he was neither arrogant nor rash and was very elegant. In the third round of the competition, Mu Chongtian had no choice but to step onto the void platform. His opponent was Martial Saint Chao Ying, a young lady in a green robe with a crown on her head. She was the beloved disciple of Martial Saint Xianxia. Although Chao Ying's strength was the same as Mu Chongtian's, a level 5 martial saint. However, Chao Ying came from a hidden sect and had been taught by Martial Saint Xianxia. She had also obtained ancient martial arts and had cultivated a mysterious secret technique. Both of them had only exchanged a few blows when Mu Chongtian was forced to retreat by Chao Ying. Although he adjusted his defensive stance and tried his best to fight with Chao Ying, he was still at a disadvantage and it was difficult for him to gain the upper hand. The two of them fought intensely in the void. Radiance shot out in all directions and the sky was filled with dazzling lights. After 15 minutes, Mu Chongtian had more than 10 wounds on his body. He had exhausted too much of his powers and was sent flying by Chao Ying's palm. His strength had decreased greatly and the aura of his soul was in a mess. However, Chao Ying did not give him a chance to recover. Moreover, Chao Ying was still calm and had only used 30 to 40% of her powers. It was obvious that she was more skilled. Mu Chongtian was also straightforward as he admitted defeat calmly and retreated. At this point, 3 out of the 4 young martial sages of the Luo River Holy Kingdom had been eliminated. Only Ji Tianxing was left fighting alone. No one knew how far he could go and what ranking he would obtain. After Mu Chongtian and Chao Ying's battle ended, it was Ji Tianxing and Qin Yu's turn to go up the stage. Ji Tianxing calmly stepped into the light door and appeared on the void platform. Qin Yu followed closely behind. After entering the void, they stood 1,000 feet away from each other. She stared coldly at Ji Tianxing and said in a venomous tone, "Ji Tianxing. Previously on the heaven-gazing platform, you insulted me in front of everyone. I will never forget this. Now that I finally have the chance to take revenge personally, I will definitely make you pay the price in blood." Ji Tianxing glanced at her indifferently and did not bother to pay attention to her. The white dragon floating on his shoulder sneered and said in a disdainful tone, "Oh little girl, you have a big mouth. How dare you talk to my master like that?" Chapter 2187. Bai Long looked askance at Martial Saint Qin Yu. His mouth was full of strange words. Martial Saint Qin Yu's expression changed immediately. She looked at Bai Long sharply and could not help but frown. "What the hell is this? How dare you humiliate me?" Bai Long stared back at her and shouted coldly, "Hey little girl, how dare you stare at me? What's the big deal about humiliating you? I want to beat you up." Martial Saint Qin Yu's expression turned gloomy. She looked at Ji Tianxing with a cold smile and said, "Hee hee. Ji Tianxing, I didn't expect you to be so despicable on the surface. A crooked stick will have a crooked shadow. You have a guy with a mouth full of filthy words by your side. I can see how you teach him." Bai Long was so angry that he glared at her and shouted, "You little girl, you're too arrogant. How dare you teach my master a lesson? Master, don't talk nonsense with her. Teach her a lesson." Ji Tianxing was not in a hurry to attack. He reached out his left hand and held Bai Long in his palm. He said through voice transmission, "Don't be so ostentatious to avoid arousing suspicion. Go back and wait for a while." When he finished speaking, Bai Long had been kept in the sword world. At this moment, Martial Saint Qin Yu saw that he was distracted and a murderous intent flashed in her eyes. Without any hesitation, she raised her hands and formed a mysterious hand seal, using an ultimate secret technique. "Soul Slayer." As she shouted coldly, she slammed her palms toward Ji Tianxing. Dark red flames filled the sky. This soul-killing fatal blow was her trump card, and she had always used it in public before. An earth-shattering dark red light curtain descended from the sky and enveloped Ji Tianxing, sealing off an area of 100 miles. The strange red light had the power to corrode one's spiritual soul. Even a top-notch martial saint could not resist it. Martial Saint Qin Yu knew that she was no match for Ji Tianxing. She could only take the opportunity to launch a sneak attack. Moreover, she would not be as stupid as Liu Kei and make the same mistake. She used her most powerful secret skill. She only wanted to injure Ji Tianxing severely before killing him. Most importantly, in the dark red light curtain that covered the sky, there was a finger-long black needle that was as thin as a hair. The black needle's aura was extremely sinister, but it was also very hidden, making it impossible to guard against. This strange black needle was the saint weapon that Yuan Chong had given her. It was called Extreme Poison. This needle was refined by the two saint refiners of the Heaven and Divine Nation after 10 years of hard work. Furthermore, it had been refined by over 1,000 rare poisons. It was extremely vicious. Once the divine soul was pierced by the poisonous needles, it would corrode and fester. There was absolutely no cure. The soul-slaying secret technique was powerful, but that was only on the surface. This extremely poisonous black needle was the real vicious killing move. Martial Saint Qinyue unleashed her black needles with all her might. When she saw the dark red light screen enveloping Ji Tianxing, she immediately revealed a relieved expression. "Ha! Let's see how you're going to block this. Just wait for your death." A sinister sneer appeared on her face as if she had gotten her way. However, her cold smile only lasted for a second before it froze on the spot. Unforeseen events were taking place. Celestial Dragon Tyrant Body. Ji Tianxing roared furiously. His entire body emitted a golden light that shot up to the sky. His body instantly expanded by more than 10 times, turning into a golden giant that was over 10 feet tall. His strength increased by more than 6 times. His entire body emitted a domineering aura that was unparalleled. Endless silver starlight exploded from his body and spread out in all directions like a mushroom cloud. Bang! 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 The silver starlight collided with the dark red light screen, causing a deafening explosion. The strange dark red light screen was actually shattered by the silver starlight. It turned into millions of pieces and scattered in the void. Even the extremely poisonous black needle was thrown out by the impact. Ji Tianxing reached out and grabbed it. After a while, the dark red light that filled the sky dissipated, and the void returned to darkness. Ji Tianxing, who was over 10 feet tall, stood majestically in the night sky like a god of war in golden armor. His entire body was unscathed. He looked at Martial Saint Qinyue expressionlessly and slowly opened his right palm. A black needle that was as thin as a strand of hair lay quietly in his palm. It shone with a dark green light. Seeing this, Martial Saint Qinyue was dumbfounded. She was so shocked that her jaw dropped. She had never expected that her strongest trump card, the soul-slaying skill, would be shattered so easily by Ji Tianxing. Even the extremely poisonous black needle that she had secretly released was intercepted by Ji Tianxing and caught in his palm. She had carried out the plan that Yuan Chong had instructed her to with all her might. However, in the end the plan still failed. It was a complete failure. Martial Saint Qinyue was stunned on the spot. She could not accept the result. After all, Ji Tianxing's performance was too invincible. It had shocked her too much. At this moment, Ji Tianxing's cold voice suddenly sounded. "I'll return this poisonous needle to you." As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his right hand and threw the extremely poisonous black needle at Martial Saint Qinyue. Swoosh! The extremely poisonous black needle turned into a ray of black light and instantly pierced through the void. It arrived in front of Martial Saint Qinyue and pointed at her forehead. At this moment, Martial Saint Qinyue finally regained her senses. However, the speed at which the extremely poisonous black needle flew back was 3 times faster than before. Although she realized that something was wrong and her eyes were filled with fear and despair, she subconsciously wanted to teleport away to avoid it. However, it was too late. Poof! A soft thud was heard. The extremely poisonous black needle instantly pierced through her glabella and deeply into her head, piercing into her spiritual soul. A drop of dark red blood spurted out from her glabella. Martial Saint Qinyue's body shook and her face turned pale. She could not help but fly backward. On the white light disk, Yuan Chong and the other martial saints witnessed this scene with their own eyes. Suddenly they were shocked. They did not know that the black needle was extremely poisonous and had the effect of corroding one's spiritual soul. However, even if the needle was an ordinary Dharma treasure, it could still kill Martial Saint Qinyue when it pierced her head. Only Yuan Chong knew how terrifying and vicious the power of the extremely poisonous black needle was. Therefore his expression was the most terrible. His eyes were filled with fear and anger. "No!" Yuan Chong roared subconsciously. His body emitted a strong killing intent and his eyes turned blood red. At this moment he was overwhelmed by anger and killing intent and almost lost his mind. He could not wait to rush into the void platform and kill Ji Tianqing personally to avenge Marshal Saint Qinyue. However, Yuan Jin sensed that something was wrong. He immediately sent a voice transmission to Yuan Chong and shouted, "Yuan Chong, don't be rash. If you rush into the void platform now, won't you be giving others an excuse?" The two brothers were both vicious. However, Yuan Jin was more shrewd and could keep his composure. When Yuan Chong heard his brother's cold shout, he instantly sobered up. He was filled with rage and stared at Ji Tianqing with killing intent. Only then did he try his best to suppress the anger in his heart. Chapter 2188. On the void platform, Marshal Saint Qinyue floated quietly in the void. Blood kept flowing out of her nose and mouth as she let out a muffled groan. Her clothes and hair accessories were still intact. She still looked dignified and did not look disheveled at all. Judging from her appearance, she seemed to be unscathed. However, in reality, the poisonous black needle had already pierced into her divine soul. The pink divine soul in her mind had already been corroded by the poison and turned black. Her consciousness had also fallen into a coma. The extremely complicated poison was crazily corroding her divine soul and robbing her of her soul power. Her life was hanging by a thread. Ji Tianqing flew closer and glanced at her with an indifferent expression. He muttered to himself, "Such a vicious hidden weapon. You really brought this upon yourself. You can't live with it." He did not have the slightest bit of pity for such a vicious woman. Fortunately, he was prepared and was strong enough to destroy Marshal Saint Qinyue's scheme. Otherwise, he would have suffered the same fate as Marshal Saint Qinyue if he was hit by the poisonous black needle. At this moment, Yuan Chong, who was on the white light disc, shouted anxiously, "Marshal Saint Qinyue admits defeat. Ji Tianqing, why aren't you leaving?" He knew very well that Marshal Saint Qinyue's life was hanging by a thread. As long as Ji Tianqing moved his finger, Marshal Saint Qinyue would be completely killed. On the void platform, Ji Tianqing heard Yuan Chong's voice and turned his head to glance at him. Actually, he did not need to guess to know that Marshal Saint Qinyue's despicable method was most likely related to Yuan Chong. Now that he saw Yuan Chong so anxious and angry, he was even more certain of his guess. Soon Yuan Chong personally entered the void platform and carried the unconscious Marshal Saint Qinyue to check on her injuries. Seeing that her divine soul had already festered and was badly damaged and corroded by the poison, Yuan Chong's heart was bleeding. He turned his head to look at Ji Tianqing and shouted with a ferocious expression, "Ji Tianqing, you damned bastard, you're so vicious. Qinyue only offended you verbally and you actually want to kill her." Ji Tianqing looked at him expressionlessly and said indifferently, "I'm just giving her a taste of her own medicine. She was the one who was vicious. Of course, she was just a stupid chess piece. The one who really deserves to die is the mastermind." After saying that, Ji Tianqing took a deep look at Yuan Chong before turning around and leaving. Yuan Chong's heart was shaken by the deep look in his eyes. Fear rose from the bottom of his heart. However, he quickly suppressed the distracting thoughts in his mind. He quickly carried Marshal Saint Qinyue and returned to the white light disc at lightning speed. "Quick! Come and help save Qinyue." He flew back to the crowd and placed Marshal Saint Qinyue on the ground. He then hurriedly performed his art to treat her. Marshal Saint Xianxia and the other young Marshal Saints quickly gathered around and looked at Marshal Saint Qinyue anxiously. After a short while, the crowd checked Marshal Saint Qinyue's injuries clearly. They frowned fiercely and revealed worried expressions. "Your Highness, Ji Tianqing's black needle is extremely poisonous. We must remove the black needle and remove the poison from her divine soul. Marshal Saint Qinyue's divine soul has been corroded to such an extent. Even if we can save her, her cultivation will fall greatly and her consciousness will be damaged. Ji Tianqing, that bastard is too despicable and vicious." The young Marshal Saints discussed with each other through sound transmission. They were filled with righteous indignation. Yuan Chong glanced coldly at the crowd and said with a dark face, "I asked you to help me remove the poisonous black needle, not for you to talk. I know the power of the poisonous black needle better than you." Hearing his words, the Marshal Saints suddenly understood the origin of the poisonous black needles. One of the young Marshal Saints said without hesitation, "Since the poisonous black needle belongs to your Highness, quickly take out the antidote and save Marshal Saint Qinyue." Yuan Chong was immediately furious. He raised his hand and slapped the young martial saint's face. He scolded angrily, "Idiot! The poisonous black needle is specially used to deal with Ji Tianxing. Where is the antidote?" The young martial saint was humiliated to the extreme after being slapped in front of everyone. However, he did not dare to resist, nor did he dare to get angry at Yuan Chong. He could only cover his face and leave submissively. In the end, Martial Saint Qing Shan and Yuan Chong worked together to remove the poisonous needle from Qin Yu's body. Yuan Chong kept the poisonous needle. Everyone worked together to cast a spell to remove the poison from Qin Yu's divine soul. Unfortunately, Qin Yu was poisoned too deeply. Even if the martial saints worked together, they could not completely remove it. Moreover, the martial arts competition had to continue. Martial Saint Qing Shan and Yuan Chong had to fight on the stage. Naturally, the treatment would be delayed. By the time the martial saints had finished their battles, more than an hour had passed. At this time, Martial Saint Qin Yu's injuries finally stabilized. However, she was still unconscious. Her divine soul had been corroded to the point of being full of holes and was on the verge of collapse. In her dark divine soul, there was still a powerful poison that was deeply rooted. She had to find a place that could detoxify the poison and spend hundreds of years to slowly remove the remaining poison. However, the damage to her divine soul was irreparable. It was basically impossible to recover. Even if the poison in her divine soul was completely removed after 100 years, her strength would not be restored. Simply put, Martial Saint Qin Yu was already crippled. Such an outcome made Yuan Chong, Martial Saint Qing Shan and the rest very depressed. At the same time, their hearts were burning with rage. They hated Ji Tianxing to the bone. Not far away, Ji Tianxing, Lu Baishuang and the rest looked at all of this with indifferent expressions. Lu Baishuang, Zhou Mingqi and Mu Changtian did not have a trace of sympathy in their hearts. They only felt pleasure and relief. Martial Saint Qin Yu's heart is vicious. She actually wanted to use the poisonous needle to kill young Master Ji. Now that she has ended up like this, she only has herself to blame. Serves her right. Fortunately, young Master Ji is strong and has taken precautions. Otherwise, the one who is seriously injured and unconscious would be him. We did not guess wrongly. Yuan Chong, Martial Saint Qing Shan and the rest will definitely think of a way to deal with young Master Ji. Bai Long circled around Ji Tianxing's shoulder. His eyes were filled with a cold smile as he said in a mocking tone, "If you don't seek death, you won't die. It's a pity that little girl doesn't understand. This Dragon Lord has already learned such petty tricks when he was playing with mud in the past." Ji Tianxing patted Bai Long's head, indicating for him to speak less. Not long after, the second round of the competition ended. The 14 martial Sacred Realm experts finally came to an end after an intense battle. 7 martial saints including Mu Changtian, Jiu and Martial Saint Qin Yu had been defeated and eliminated. The 7 people who had successfully advanced to the third round of the competition were Ji Tianxing, Taihao Yunqi, Martial Saint Qing Shan, Martial Saint Tian Exin Chao Ing Yuan Chong and a tall martial saint. A tall martial saint was of a foreign race. He wore a fiery red robe and a dark gold crown on his head. He had a head full of fiery red hair and a pair of golden eyes. He had a fluffy beard on his lower jaw and looked somewhat exotic. He was the current king of the Flame Spirit tribe and was also a rank 7 martial saint. Chapter 2189. However, the atmosphere on the white disc was getting more and more tense. Most of the 20 young martial saints were heavily injured. Their auras were weak and their expressions and eyes were dim. However, the most miserable one was Martial Saint Qin Yu. Yuan Chong wanted to send her away from the void platform and return to Sky Gazing City to heal. However, the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly was not over yet and no one could leave. No matter how arrogant he was, he did not dare to go against the rules to avoid embarrassing his big brother Yuan Zhen. Soon, the third round of the competition began. Yuan Zhen announced expressionlessly, "In the third round of the competition, Yuan Chong, who is ranked first, does not need to draw lots. He will advance to the next round. As for the other 6 martial saints, they will draw lots to decide their opponents." After that, he threw the 6 jade slips into the air and messed up the order. Wenren Jiuxing, who was always quiet, stood up. "For this round of drawing lots, I'll be the one to do it." He waved his hand and shot out 3 green lights. The 6 jade slips were divided into 3 and brought back to him. Then he read out the results with a solemn expression. The results are as follows. A tall martial saint against Chao Ing, Taihao Yunqi against Qingshan Martial Saint, Tianxing against Tianxin Martial Saint. As he finished, Atal and Chao Ying looked at each other and stepped into the light door calmly. Ji Tianxing looked calm. Tianxin Martial Saint looked at him with a dark gaze. No one knew what he was thinking. Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian were excited. They transmitted their voices to Ji Tianxing. Young Master Ji, the chance for revenge is finally here. Haha, Tianxin Martial Saint, that bastard, he finally met you. He is unlucky this time. Even Lu Baishuang gave up her modesty and looked at Ji Tianxing with a gentle gaze, a hint of hope in her eyes. Although she did not say it out loud. However, Ji Tianxing could understand what she meant just by looking at her eyes. Obviously, she wanted Ji Tianxing to avenge her. As for Martial Saint Qingshan, his expression was rather gloomy. He secretly glanced at Taihao Yunqi and couldn't help but mutter, "Damn it, I actually met him. I'm afraid I won't even be able to secure 4th place this time. Even if he can defeat the other two, he can only rank 5th at most." Soon the battle between Atal and Chao Ying began. The two of them gave it their all and executed all kinds of secret techniques. They fought in the void, causing the sky to be filled with light and shadows. Atal was the king of the Flame Spirit clan and was naturally adept at controlling fire. Although he was only a martial sage, he was able to control the heavenly flames. Every move he made caused a sea of fire to fill the sky and fill up the empty space. His attacks were incomparably ferocious and overbearing. His mana was dense and long, as if it was inexhaustible. On the other hand, Chao Ying was a descendant of the orthodox lineage. Her martial arts foundation was solid, and her mana surged like a river. Moreover, the sword techniques and ultimate techniques that she executed were orthodox techniques of the 5 elements. Every single move was filled with a vast and mighty aura. However, she was too young after all, and her strength was 2 levels lower than Atal's. The two of them had only exchanged a few hundred moves, and she was already showing signs of defeat. She was obviously at a disadvantage and was in a very passive position. Many martial sages on the white light disk were watching the battle between the two of them attentively. Sea Island Master, Cloud Sky Palace Master, Granny Yulong, and the others commented from time to time. They were all worried for Chao Ying. Lady Chao Ying is so young, but she already has such a high cultivation level and attainments in the sword principle. She is really commendable. Every move she makes has the demeanor of a prestigious lineage. It is really admirable. Can be seen that the Exploration Mountain martial sage has put in a lot of effort. It is a pity that her strength is not as high as Atal's. After all, she has less than 300 years of cultivation. As the people discussed, they looked regretful and comforted the Exploration Mountain martial sage. However, the Exploration Mountain martial sage shook his head and said with a smile, "You don't have to comfort me. Chao Ying will definitely lose this battle. She is no match for Atal. Actually, with Chao Ying's age and strength, I am already very happy that she is able to enter this round of battle. Of course, this is the result of drawing lots. Of course, there is a bit of luck involved." Seeing the Exploration Mountain martial sage being so wise and open-minded, the people did not say anything more. They all started to compliment him. After 15 minutes, the battle between Atal and Chao Ying ended. The result was without suspense. Atal was naturally the winner. Although Chao Ying lost, it was still a glorious defeat. Chao Ying admitted defeat and left the arena while panting. Atal cupped his hands and bowed to her before leaving as well. The first battle ended. Immediately after, the second battle began. The Green Mountain martial sage and Taihao Yunqi entered the arena one after another. After standing still in the void, they cupped their hands and bowed to each other. "7th God's child, I didn't expect to meet you. I am really unlucky." The Green Mountain martial sage revealed a bitter smile and said to Taihao Yunqi. Taihao Yunqi smiled and nodded. He comforted him, "There is no choice. This result was drawn by drawing lots. It is not something you and I can control." The Green Mountain martial sage nodded slightly. He turned his head and glanced at Ji Tianxing on the white light disk. He said in a deep voice, "Actually, I want to fight with that kid the most. I hope he will lose to the Heavenly Heart martial sage. This way I will have a chance to fight with him for the 5th place." Taihao Yunqi raised his eyebrows and said with a playful smile, "This idea of yours is destined to fail. It is better to give up on it." What do you mean?" The Green Mountain martial sage frowned and looked at him with displeasure. Taihao Yunqi smiled and said, "No need to ask. You will know later." Then the two did not waste any more words. They both took out their magic treasures and weapons and started to fight. The two were the best among the young martial sages. One was ranked second and the other was ranked fourth. Not only were their cultivation realm high, but their cultivation was also very profound. The secret techniques they had mastered were also strange and unpredictable. In the process of fighting, all kinds of lost and rare secret techniques emerged one after another. It was dazzling. Without a doubt, the battle between Taihao Yunqi and the Green Mountain martial sage was the most entertaining battle in this sacred assembly. The two were locked in a fierce battle. Strange techniques were used, causing the void within 500 miles to turn into a seven-colored ocean, creating all kinds of scenes. Not only were the martial sages on the disc entranced, but even the hundreds of thousands of martial sages on the Sky City Square were fascinated. They were excited and agitated. This intense battle lasted for a full half an hour before it ended. The Green Mountain martial sage was still slightly inferior. He was severely injured by Taihao Yunqi. His body was covered in blood and his hair was disheveled. However, the Green Mountain martial sage had an ulterior motive. He refused to admit defeat and continued to fight. He did this to help Yuan Cheng. He purposely exhausted Taihao Yunqi's magic power and forced him to use several trump cards. In this way, Yuan Cheng watched the battle and understood more about Taihao Yunqi. That was why he was confident. Chapter 2190. The battle between Taihao Yunqi and the Green Mountain martial saint had ended. Just as the Green Mountain martial saint had expected, he had lost to Taihao Yunqi's sword and could not maintain his fourth position. Even if he could defeat the other three who had lost, he would at most be ranked fifth. Soon it was Ji Tianxing and the Heavenly Heart martial saint's turn. Before the two of them had even entered the stage, there was a deep enmity between them. Ji Tianxing glanced at him coldly. He had already made up his mind to not let this hypocritical and despicable guy off. The Heavenly Heart martial saint naturally thought of this and guessed that Ji Tianxing would take revenge for Lu Baishuang. However, he was proud and did not think that he would definitely lose to Ji Tianxing. He looked at Ji Tianxing with a sharp gaze and his lips curled into a cold smile. Then he stepped into the golden light door and entered the void platform. Ji Tianxing followed closely behind. They stood still in the void, facing each other with a distance of 10 miles between them. The two of them stared at each other, their eyes filled with coldness. Ji Tianxing did not want to waste his breath and immediately activated his powers. He formed a sword art with both hands and displayed his sword art. Sword rain. His hands formed a mysterious seal, and his body lit up with a golden light that soared into the sky, bursting forth with an incomparably powerful aura. Suddenly, thousands of rays of starlight appeared out of nowhere in the dark and cold void. Every ray of starlight condensed into a starlight sword that was 10 feet long and shot down from the sky. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Instantly, more than 6,000 starlight sword lights covered the void and locked onto the Heavenly Heart martial saint's spiritual soul aura. As long as he was in the void platform, he would not be able to escape from the sword rain. Before the rain of swords fell, the void within a radius of several hundred miles was illuminated in a dazzling silver light. The terrifying power suppressed the Heavenly Heart martial saint, causing his body to bend and his face to turn pale. In the depths of his spiritual soul, a cold aura of death appeared. He could clearly feel the aura of death. This is impossible. I have already reached the 7th level martial saint realm and he has just broken through to the martial saint realm. How can he have such terrifying power? At this moment, this was the only thought in the Heavenly Heart martial saint's mind. 100 Alchemy Golden Dipper. At the critical moment, he shouted with a solemn expression and summoned a powerful defensive magic treasure. Swoosh. With a flash of golden light, a huge golden dipper the size of a house appeared above the Heavenly Heart martial saint's head. The dipper's dipper looked like an ordinary person's dipper. The dipper's dipper had a large opening at the top while its bottom was smaller. The material of the golden dipper was very special. Its surface was engraved with mysterious runes, and it flickered with a dark golden light. Golden Dipper Saint Realm spent 80 years of his blood alchemy soul Dipper. Not only did it consume 36 types of ores and adamantium, it had also been tempered 1,000,000 times in the geocentric furnace, making its defense extremely powerful. Protect him, protect Mountain Martial Saint Soul Mind, Saint Soul Soul's Chi Sword. Bees. Bang 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 bang. The starry sword light fiercely stabbed into the 100 refinements golden chalice, and actually emitted a series of metallic clanging sounds, crisp and clear. After that, many of the starry sword lights changed their direction and pierced towards the heavenly heart martial saint. However, they were all blocked by the golden light shield, causing a loud and dull sound. For a full 10 breaths of time the void was in chaos. Under the dazzling starlight, there was an inconspicuous golden light. Even though Heaven Heart Martial Saint had the protection of the 100 Alchemy Golden Dipper, he was still like a small boat in the middle of a stormy sea, undulating up and down, appearing and disappearing. Thousands of starry giant swords moved according to Ji Tianqing's thoughts. They danced in the void and tried to assassinate the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. The golden light shield could no longer protect him, and was soon shattered by the starry sword. He had no choice but to enter the 100 Alchemy Golden Chalice and rely on this high-grade sacred artifact to protect himself. After 10 breaths of time, the thousands of starry swords were shattered by the 100 Alchemy Golden Dipper, turning into billions of specks of starlight that dissipated in the void. At this moment the Heaven Heart Martial Saint flew out from the 100 Alchemy Golden Dipper, panting with lingering fear. He looked at the 100 Alchemy Golden Dipper carefully and realized that it was filled with scratches and dents. Even though the Golden Dipper was not broken and could still be used normally. However, the densely packed scratches and dents showed the terrifying power of the starry sword lights, causing the Heaven Heart Martial Saint's heart to palpitate and his mouth to dry up. Damn it! He did not even use his sacred artifact and he can hurt my 100 Alchemy Golden Dipper? This is too terrifying. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint's expression became more serious and a cold light flashed across his eyes. No, I cannot delay time with him. If I continue to be entangled with him, I am afraid my 100 Alchemy Golden Dipper will be broken. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint made up his mind and immediately took out a dark red talisman. Swoosh. When he poured his mana into the talisman immediately burned and turned into a dark red blood light that surged into his body. Instantly, his body expanded violently and in the blink of an eye, he became a giant that was 1,000 feet tall. This giant's body was dark red and its 4 limbs and muscles bulged up like rocks. Its face was ferocious and terrifying and its eyes were dark red like blood. Its body was still burning with dark red flames and it exuded an extremely violent aura. More importantly, its strength had increased by more than 4 times and it was comparable to a rank 8 martial sage. Roar. The giant beat its chest and let out a carefree and excited roar. Its eyes were red as it stared at Ji Tianqing. It sneered and punched towards him. Ji Tianqing die. Following its deep roar, it punched out 2 fist shadows that were the size of mountains and smashed towards Ji Tianqing from the sky. Ji Tianqing raised his head and glanced at it. He was expressionless as he shouted, "Heavenly Dragon Overlord Body." Instantly, his body shone with bright golden light and his body expanded abruptly, turning into a golden giant that was 1,000 feet tall. The giant that the Heaven Heart Martial Saint had transformed into had a violent and terrifying aura. Ji Tianqing had turned into a golden giant and his aura was sacred and majestic. Star-shattering fist. He was not to be outdone. He raised his fists and punched out 2 starry fist radiances to fight against the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. Bang bang. The starry fist radiances and the dark red fist shadows collided violently. Instantly there were 2 deafening explosions. The 4 fist shadows collapsed at the same time and exploded into light fragments that covered the sky and scattered in the void. However, Ji Tianqing's strength was stronger and he actually sent the Heaven Heart Martial Saint flying backwards. He rolled and smashed into the void 100 miles away. Without waiting for the Heavenly Heart Martial Saint to land, he took the opportunity to use an ultimate technique. Heavenly Dragon Proud Slash. He clasped his palms together and activated 100% of his strength as he slashed towards the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. Chapter 2191. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint had just dissipated the impact and stopped in midair. Before he could regulate his breathing and suppress his internal injuries and surging dermic powers, his surroundings were illuminated by a dazzling golden light. He looked up subconsciously and saw a huge golden dragon shadow, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. Within the golden dragon shadow, there was a huge golden sword that was 1,000 feet long. Its sword intent was extremely sharp. Oh no! The Heavenly Heart Martial Saint's expression changed drastically. A tinge of fear flashed across his eyes. At the critical moment he controlled the 100 Alchemy Golden Chalice to block above his head. Clang! Almost at the same time, the huge sword slashed onto the 100 Alchemy Golden Chalice and exploded with an earth-shattering sound. At that moment, the huge golden sword exploded into millions of golden fragments. The 100 Alchemy Golden Chalice also had a 3-foot-long dent on it. It tumbled and flew into the distant void. Ji Tianxing's sword was too powerful. It actually sent the 100 Alchemy Golden Chalice flying. It was completely out of the Heaven Heart Martial Saint's control. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint was instantly shocked. He subconsciously teleported 50 miles away from Ji Tianxing. Even though he had already expected Ji Tianxing's attack to not stop and wanted to take the opportunity to defeat him, his reaction was fast enough. In the blink of an eye he had teleported dozens of miles away. However, he still underestimated Ji Tianxing's strength and methods. Swoosh! With a flash of golden light, Ji Tianxing followed him like a shadow and mysteriously appeared behind him. Before he could turn around, Ji Tianxing slapped out a huge golden palm and hit him fiercely. That huge palm was also surrounded by a golden dragon shadow. Its power was unparalleled. Bang! With a deafening explosion, the Heaven Heart Martial Saint was hit by the huge palm. He flew out with blood spurting out of his 7 orifices. This time he did not have the protection of the 100 Alchemy Golden Chalice. Even if he was wearing a saint's soft armor, it was difficult to block the terrifying power of the Heavenly Dragon Palm. His back caved in. Dozens of ribs and bones in his chest were all shattered by the terrifying power. Even his 5 viscera and 6 bowels were shattered and displaced. He drew an arc in the void and fell 50 miles away. As soon as he stood up he couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. The dark red blood was obviously mixed with pieces of internal organs. The heart-wrenching pain caused the Heaven Heart Martial Saint's face to turn pale. He furrowed his brows tightly and cold sweat broke out all over his body. Due to his heavy injuries, his strength was greatly weakened, and he only had about 60% of his original strength left. However, he still gritted his teeth and refused to admit defeat. He made up his mind that even if he lost he could not let Ji Tianxing win too easily. At the very least he had to exhaust Ji Tianxing's mana so that Ji Tianxing would not be able to go all out in the next round. Shocking Sword Codex. Enduring his injuries he formed a hand seal with both hands and used his trump card. Suddenly, flames surged out of his body and condensed into thousands of flaming swords that pierced towards Ji Tianxing. A look of disdain flashed across Ji Tianxing's eyes. He shouted, showing off in front of an expert. "Let me show you a real sword art." As he spoke he formed a hand seal and used his ultimate sword art. "Sect returning swords." He shouted coldly and formed a mysterious hand seal, releasing a mysterious and invisible power. Instantly, over 100 starry giant swords appeared out of thin air within a radius of several hundred miles. Kill! Hundreds of swords fell like meteors and pointed towards the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. At this moment the void was completely filled with violent sword chi. 60% of the area was illuminated by the cold starlight. Under the huge swords was the Heaven Heart Martial Saint, whose face was covered with blood. 40% of the area was illuminated by the dazzling flames. Under the thousands of flaming swords was Ji Tianxing, who was unscathed. His expression was cold and indifferent. Such a stark contrast made the 30 or so martial sages who were watching the battle secretly break out in cold sweat. The hundreds of thousands of martial artists in the Sky City Square all had their hearts in their mouths. All of them held their breaths and stared at the light screen without blinking. Everyone knew that this was the trump card battle between Ji Tianxing and the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. After this battle the victor would be revealed. Bang bang bang. Thousands of flaming swords hit Ji Tianxing one after another, creating a series of loud noises. However, he maintained the Heavenly Dragon Overlord body form and his whole body shone with golden light. The flaming swords that were as dense as raindrops were all shattered after hitting him. His body only trembled a few times and he was pushed back a few steps by the power of the swords. He did not have any obvious injuries. On the other hand, the Heaven Heart Martial Saint was in a miserable state. Even though he was in his transformed state, he was 1,000 feet tall and his whole body was dark red like fire, filled with a violent aura. However, after the hundreds of swords hit him one after another, his flesh and blood flew everywhere as he screamed in pain. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint was pushed back 10 miles by the swords. His left arm was crushed by the sword radiance and his right wrist was cut off by the swords. Even his chest and back were covered with holes and wounds, and dark red blood was spurting out of them. His whole body was covered with blood and he was in a miserable state. He did not look like a human anymore. He looked like a piece of minced meat that had been slaughtered. Seeing this scene, the many martial sages on the round plate sighed silently in their hearts. The hundreds of thousands of martial artists in the Sky City Square finally let out a relieved expression. They cheered and discussed loudly. Everyone knew that the victor had been decided. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint was injured to this extent. He had already lost. However, before he admitted defeat, the battle was not over. More than half of the hundreds of starry swords were shattered. The remaining swords immediately gathered together under the control of Zhou Xian and condensed into a huge sword that was 1,000 feet long. Slash! He shouted with a cold expression and pointed his right hand at the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. That terrifyingly huge sword descended from the sky and slashed towards the Heavenly Heart Martial Saint. With the Heaven Heart Martial Saint's condition, he could not dodge it. Once he was hit by the huge sword, his body would be destroyed. Even if he did not die, he would be severely injured. At this moment of life and death, the Heaven Heart Martial Saint's heart was filled with despair and shock. He did not dare to force himself and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Stop! I admit defeat." This hoarse shout was filled with an incomparably anxious tone. It was as deafening as rolling thunder. The many martial sages on the white light disc all heard it clearly. Immediately, strange expressions appeared on their faces. Similar thoughts appeared in everyone's mind. If you admit defeat, just admit defeat. Why do you shout so loudly? Do you want everyone to hear you? I've never seen anyone admit defeat. How could he have the nerve to shout so loudly and confidently? Zhou Xian immediately frowned. He waved his right hand and controlled the huge sword to stop. Swoosh! The huge sword stopped in front of the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. It was only 3 feet away from his head. The blade of the sword was right in front of his eyes. The cold and sharp sword aura enveloped him, causing him to feel cold all over. His mind was blank. Chapter 2192. The giant star sword had yet to disappear and was still emitting a terrifying sword chi. Heaven's Heart Martial Saint's body froze on the spot and he did not dare to move. After a long time, when the giant star sword disappeared, he heaved a sigh of relief as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He revealed a grateful expression as if he had just survived a disaster. He relaxed and felt that the energy in his body was like flowing water, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. His limbs and bones were in pain and his mind and consciousness were dizzy. He finally could not hold on any longer and his body went limp as he lay in the void, panting heavily. Zhou Xian glanced at him coldly and turned to leave the void. Heaven's Heart Martial Saint's pathetic state was witnessed by all the martial saints and hundreds of thousands of practitioners. Instantly, the martial saints on the round plate started discussing. Heaven's Heart Martial Saint is a 7th realm martial saint. How could he be so frightened? The duel between the two of them just now was simply exquisite beyond compare. In comparison, Zhou Xian's sword skills were even more marvelous. Heaven's Heart Martial Saint's sword skills seemed to be imitating him and it was very clumsy. A few young martial saints discussed secretly, not daring to let the people from Heaven's End God Nation hear them. Yuan Chang's face was as cold as ice as he cursed angrily. Useless trash, how could he be so frightened by Zhou Xian? He really embarrassed me. In the square of sky-gazing city, the sounds of discussion were like a tsunami, deafening. Oh my God, this is definitely the most exciting duel in this sacred assembly. The sword skills of the two martial saints are simply superb and have reached the peak. Zhou Xian's sword skills are obviously more profound. He really has the style of Kenshin. There are rumors in the martial world that he is the successor of Kenshin, but no one believed it. Today, after seeing him display his sword skills, I can confirm that he is definitely the successor. Speaking of which, Heaven's Heart Martial Saint is a great martial saint who has been famous for many years. He is powerful and has a respected status. But he was so scared by Zhou Xian that he was in such a sorry state. After all, he had walked through the gates of hell and was almost killed by Zhou Xian's sword. How could he not be afraid? So even martial saints are afraid of death. I thought that those high and mighty martial sages were like deities. One is the Heavenly Heart Martial Saint and the other is the Tianqing Martial Saint. Their names are somewhat similar but their strengths are different. It just so happens that the two of them met. Seems to be quite interesting. Many martial artists in the square discussed heatedly for a long time. On the void platform on the white light disc, Ji Tianqing calmly returned to Lu Baishuang's side and smiled at her. Are you satisfied with this result? Lu Baishuang looked at the Heavenly Heart Martial Saint in the air. Seeing him in such a sorry state like a dead dog, a look of relief appeared in his eyes. The anger and hatred that had accumulated in his heart finally dissipated. She turned her head to look at Ji Tianqing and smiled warmly like a spring breeze. She nodded heavily. This smile made Ji Tianqing stunned. It also made Zhou Mingqi and Mu Changtian dumbfounded. The two of them looked at each other and whispered softly. Holy Emperor Baishuang can actually smile? Aren't you talking nonsense? Who doesn't know how to smile? It's just that Holy Emperor Baishuang has always been as cold as ice. No one has ever seen her smile before. That's true. Looks like young Master Ji's charm is great enough to melt the ice mountain. Not long after, the Heavenly Heart Martial Saint left the void platform in a sorry state. This round of competition had ended. Next, Chao Ying, Qingshan Martial Saint and the Heavenly Heart Martial Saint had to compete for the 5th place. The Heavenly Heart Martial Saint was severely injured. His physical body was on the verge of collapse and his strength was extremely weak. He no longer had the strength to continue fighting. He could only give up and settle for the 7th place. Chao Ying and the Qingshan Martial Saint went up to the void platform and started a not-so-intense battle. The two of them had a harmonious relationship. One was the Holy Emperor of the Heaven and Divine Nation and the other was a citizen of the Heaven and Divine Nation. Both of them loved Yuanzhen. So far there had been no injuries or deaths in their fight. After exchanging over 100 blows, Chao Ying admitted defeat. Thus Chao Ying was ranked 6th and the Qingshan Martial Saint was ranked 5th. Next, it was the final round of competition. This was the final battle of the Martial Saint rankings. It would also be the most intense and exciting. No matter if it was the martial saints on the round plate or the hundreds of thousands of martial artists in the sky-gazing city, they were all filled with anticipation. Yuanzhen held the identity jade slips of Ji Tianqing, Taihao Yunqi, Atal and Yuan Chong and threw them into the air. Granny Yulong walked out and said with a kind face, although there are only 4 martial saints left in the last round of competition and drawing lots doesn't mean much, I still have to do it. I'll help the 4 of you draw lots to decide your opponents. After saying that, she waved her hand and shot out 2 rays of golden light, splitting the 4 jade slips into 2 and bringing them in front of her. Then she read out with a serious expression, the results of the last round of competition are as follows. The first round, Ji Tianqing vs. Atal. The second round, Taihao Yunqi vs. Yuan Chong. The 2 winners will continue to fight for the 1st and 2nd place. The 2 defeated martial saints will also have to fight for the 3rd and 4th place. As soon as she finished speaking, the red-haired alien King Atal stepped into the void platform first. He stood in the void with a calm expression, holding a dark golden scepter inlaid with gems in his hand. Dark red flames danced in his eyes. Seeing Ji Tianqing enter the void and stand 1,000 feet away from him, he stroked his beard and said, Martial Saint Tianqing, please draw your sword. Ji Tianqing shook his head and said calmly, my sword Dao has reached perfection. I don't need a sword. Atal raised his eyebrows and said regretfully, so you're going to fight me empty-handed? I won't be able to see the divine sword? Ji Tianqing frowned. What do you mean? Atal hammered his chest with his right hand and bowed to him. He explained, I admired Kenshin very much when I was young. It is this emperor's fortune to be able to meet you. It is this emperor's honor to be able to spar with you. Also, I'm very interested in the legendary divine sword, the Burial of Heaven. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to see it. Now that I've heard that the divine sword is in your hands, I wonder if you can show it to me and fulfill one of my wishes? Ji Tianqing looked at him deeply and said indifferently, your expression and tone are very sincere. It doesn't seem like you're lying. I'm willing to believe your intentions. But unfortunately, I can't agree to your request. Atal's face was filled with disappointment. He said regretfully, what a pity. Since that's the case, I'll go all out and force you to use the divine sword. Chapter 2193. Tal did not waste any more time. He immediately waved his scepter and performed a powerful secret skill. Heavenly Fire Backflow. He formed a seal with his left hand and waved his dark golden scepter with his right. He let out a low roar and released endless red heavenly fire. Boom! The dark red heavenly fire covered the sky and poured down from the void. It was like endless seawater pouring into a whirlpool. It immediately drowned Ji Tianxing's figure. Ji Tianxing was in the middle of the heavenly fire whirlpool, but he was not worried at all. He secretly activated his dermic powers and his body lit up with a faint golden light. His entire body became real and illusory as he entered a translucent state. The endless red heavenly fire crazily washed over his body. However, he was calm as usual and did not feel any pain. He also did not perform a counterattack. Atal's expression changed when he saw this. He used all his strength to activate the heavenly fire and formed dozens of fire dragons to attack Ji Tianxing. Bam bam bam. However, Ji Tianxing was still unharmed after being hit by dozens of fire dragons. He waved his hand and shot out dozens of giant golden palms, smashing the fire dragons into pieces. Soon 10 breaths passed. Atal unleashed the power of his secret technique to the limit, but he still could not harm Ji Tianxing in the slightest. He had no choice but to withdraw his secret skill in frustration. After the endless heavenly fire dissipated, he was not in a hurry to attack. He looked at Ji Tianxing with a puzzled expression and asked, "Martial Sage Tianxing, why didn't you counterattack?" Ji Tianxing said calmly, "Not long ago I mastered a secret skill and wanted to test it on your heavenly fire. The effect is not bad." Atal was shocked and asked in disbelief, "I'm not boasting, but I was born with the ability to control all the flames in the world. After reaching the martial sage realm, I was able to control the most terrifying heavenly fire. Not to mention flesh and blood, I can even use the heavenly fire to melt a sacred weapon into molten iron. Martial Saint Tianxing, what kind of secret technique have you cultivated to be able to disregard this emperor's heavenly flame?" Ji Tianxing glanced at him and said calmly, "It's a special sword body. I can only tell you this much. I can't tell you anything else." Sword body? A strange look flashed across Atal's eyes as he asked with more excitement, "Could it be the great achievement sword body created by Kenshin and passed down to the world?" That secret skill was spread from the Pillar of Heaven's mountains and was regarded as a Sword Dao treasure book by millions of Sword Dao martial artists. It is truly an unimaginable Sword Dao absolute art. Ji Tianxing looked at him coldly and said in a deep voice, "You talk too much." Atal's expression froze and he was a little embarrassed. However, he quickly returned to normal and said with a smile, "Martial Saint Tianxing, why don't we make a deal? As long as you tell me whether or not you are the reincarnation of Kenshin, and let me see the Sword of Burial of Heaven, I will immediately admit defeat. This way you can win without using any power. It will be very beneficial for your upcoming battles." Without a doubt, the deal that Atal proposed was extremely tempting. However, Ji Tianxing did not even consider it and said directly, "No need. If I want to defeat you, it will only take a moment. I won't use much power." Atal frowned and his face darkened. He said angrily, "Martial Saint Tianxing, I am so polite to you, but you are so arrogant. Since you don't know what's good for you, don't blame me for being rude." Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly, "Bring it on." Soul-burning purple flame. Atal shouted angrily and held the dark golden staff tightly with both hands. He released endless dark purple flames towards Ji Tianxing. The dark purple flames that covered the sky condensed into 6 huge purple dragons in the void and attacked Ji Tianxing from all directions. Atal knew that ordinary earth fire and heaven fire could not do anything to Ji Tianxing. Therefore, he directly used his strongest trump card and released his ultimate skill, soul-burning purple flame. The dark purple flames looked dazzling, but they were extremely cold and were specially used to suppress the divine soul of a martial saint. Once the divine soul came into contact with the purple flames, it would be burned to ashes. In less serious cases, the divine soul would be injured and their strength would decrease greatly. In more serious cases, the divine soul would be destroyed on the spot and they would die forever. However, Ji Tianxing's expression did not change when he saw the 6 purple fire dragons flying towards him. He raised his left hand and pointed at the void. He shouted coldly, "Stars." Instantly, hundreds of star flames appeared in the void, turning into silver dragon shadows that were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws, flying towards the 6 purple fire dragons. Bang! 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 The hundreds of star dragon shadows collided with the 6 purple fire dragons, and a series of muffled sounds rang out. The 2 completely different dragon shadows tangled in the void and consumed each other. Tianxing raised his right hand again and pointed at the void. He shouted coldly, "Lightning!" Suddenly, a 3,000-meter tall 5-colored divine lightning bolt descended from the void and struck at Atal's head. The 5-colored divine lightning beam contained 5 different types of lightning, and its power was terrifying to the extreme. Atal frowned and blocked his head with the dark golden staff. He sneered, "Ha, it's just lightning. Which martial saint would be afraid of lightning?" It was true that every martial saint had to undergo the baptism and test of the 9 heavenly tribulations. Everyone had been struck by lightning many times. Not only could they resist the power of the lightning, but some martial saints could even absorb and control the lightning. However, when the 5-colored lightning bolt struck Atal, it was too late for him to regret. Boom! Crack! With a deafening boom, the huge pillar of divine lightning drowned Atal's figure. The shield released by the dark golden staff was shattered on the spot. Even the scepter was sent flying and fell into the void. Atal was also burned black and smoking by the 5-colored lightning bolt. He screamed and fell into the void. Just a moment ago he was wearing a golden robe and a crown. He was holding a luxurious and exquisite staff and looked like a noble king of a foreign tribe. But now he had turned into charcoal. Black smoke was coming out of his nose and mouth, making him look like a burnt chicken. Cough, cough. He endured the dizziness and pain. As soon as he got up, he coughed out a few mouthfuls of black blood. He looked down at his chest and arms and saw that his clothes had been burned to ashes. His skin and flesh were also burned black and dry. Black ashes fell off when he rubbed them. Damn it! He was shocked and angry. He glared at Tianxing coldly. At this moment, Tianxing raised his right hand and pointed his index and middle fingers at him like a sword. Sky-piercing finger. A cold light shot out from the tip of his finger and disappeared into the void. Atal sensed danger coming. His pupils shrank and he instinctively teleported to dodge. However, he underestimated Tianxing's speed. Boom! In the dull sound, a silver light burst out from his chest and blew up countless black fragments and dust. The black ashes and fragments were his flesh and bones. Chapter 2194. When Atal steadied himself, he found that his chest and abdomen were empty, with only a pitch-black spine connecting them. His skin, flesh, bone marrow, meridians and organs were all shattered and disappeared. All that was left was a half-black and half-red heart. It was still beating and dark red blood was constantly flowing out. You! Atal's eyes widened in fear, looking at Tianxing in shock. Previously he was struck by the 5-colored lightning and his body was numb. Now that his body was so heavily injured he couldn't feel any pain. This was too terrifying. At the same time, Tianxing took a step forward and appeared in front of him, staring coldly at him. You've already lost. Atal was shocked and angry, his body trembled, gritting his teeth as he shouted, "No, this emperor hasn't." Tianxing said indifferently, "If you don't admit defeat you will die in the next move." Atal's body shook and he became much more clear-headed, his anger dissipating. He had to admit that Tianxing's words were arrogant and confident, but he was right. He was already so heavily injured, if he continued to resist he might really lose his life. With Tianxing's strength and methods he would definitely do what he said. After a moment of silence, he lowered his head with a dejected expression and said in a hoarse voice, "This emperor admits defeat." It was just 4 words, but it seemed to have used up all his strength. After speaking, he used his magic power to wrap around his broken body, and staggered away from the void. When he returned to the round plate where everyone was gathered, he inadvertently glanced at Yuan Zhen, an apologetic look flashing through his eyes. Yuan Zhen's expression didn't change, as if he didn't notice. But in reality his fists in his sleeves were clenched and the veins on the back of his hands were bulging. Qin Zheng, who was standing behind him, didn't hide as well as he did. His brows furrowed and a cold light flashed through his eyes. Damn bastard. We used both soft and hard methods, but he still didn't take the bait and didn't show any signs. Your Highness, although we released the news and let everyone know that Tianxing is Kenshin's reincarnation, However, when everyone heard this news, they were all skeptical. We still can't find any conclusive evidence to prove Ji Tianxing's identity. Yuanjin transmitted his voice with an indifferent tone. We acted too hastily and made it too obvious. Ji Tianxing sensed our hostility, so he was very cautious and vigilant. It's normal that he didn't reveal any flaws. Qin Jing was stunned for a moment and asked doubtfully, then what should we do? Could it be that we can't do anything to him and allow him to take first place in the sacred assembly? How is that possible? Yuanjin sneered and said in a cold voice, since Ji Tianxing has already seen through our intentions, we'll make sure he doesn't return. I must obtain the sword of burial of heaven. Qin Jing hesitated for a moment before asking solemnly, Your Highness, are we really going to use that plan? Right now the void platform was in full view of everyone. He's a popular figure in the Luoshui divine nation. If something happens to him here, we won't be able to escape. If I'm not worried, what are you worried about? Yuanjin turned his head and glanced at him and sneered, as long as we can obtain the sword of burial of heaven and obtain the mystery of Father's ascension, everything will be worth it. Moreover, Ji Tianxing's accident is an accident. What does it have to do with us? For the past 300 years, the void platform has been unstable and accidents happen frequently. This is something everyone knows. Yuanjin did not continue his words. As for the plan, he had already discussed it with Qin Jing and both of them were well aware of it. Soon the second round of the competition began. Taihao Yunqi and Yuan Chong entered the void platform one after another and started a fierce battle. Both of them had special identities. One was the seventh godson of the vast divine nation, while the other was the fourth godson of the heaven and divine nation. Moreover, both of them had reached the rank 7 martial sage realm and had mastered powerful secret skills. Naturally, this battle was incomparably exciting. The sky was filled with spiritual light and it lit up the void for hundreds of miles, forming a dazzling scene. Various secret skills and martial skills were displayed by the two of them, and it was a feast for the eyes of the spectators. Not only were the hundreds of thousands of martial artists captivated by the battle, even the many martial sages on the round plate were excited and their eyes were dazzled. This exciting and intense battle lasted for a full hour. In the end, Taihao Yunqi was defeated by Yuan Chong by a single move. This result was not out of everyone's expectations. After Taihao Yunqi and Yuan Chong left the void, Yuanjin announced loudly, for this round of battle, Ji Tianxing and Yuan Chong have won. Next, Taihao Yunqi and Immortal will fight for the third and fourth place. As for the first and second place, it will be decided by the battle between Ji Tianxing and Yuan Chong. As Yuanjin's voice fell, Taihao Yunqi stepped into the light door and entered the dark void. Although he had used up a lot of his spiritual powers in the battle with Yuan Chong, he was also seriously injured. However, he refused to give up and insisted on entering the arena. Immortal's injuries were even more serious and his strength was reduced by 40 to 50%. He was in a terrible state. Originally, he was still hesitating whether he should enter the arena to fight. Seeing Taihao Yunqi enter the arena with injuries, he could not just admit defeat. He could only enter the void. The battle between the two of them was not too intense. After all, both of them had suffered heavy injuries. After exchanging more than 1,000 moves, Immortal was sent flying by Taihao Yunqi and his injuries were even more serious. Immortal thought about it for a while and admitted defeat. As a result, Taihao Yunqi became the third place of the sacred assembly. The fourth place was naturally Immortal. 3 of the top 5 places of the sacred assembly had been decided. Only the battle between Ji Tianxing and Yuan Chong would be settled. Suddenly, the atmosphere on the white light round plate became heavy. More than 30 martial sages' gazes were focused on the two of them. In the square of Wangtian City, hundreds of thousands of martial artists were also staring at the screen, looking forward to the battle between Ji Tianxing and Yuan Chong. Everyone knew that this would be the last battle of this sacred assembly and it would definitely be the most exciting battle. Everyone had doubts in their hearts. Would Yuan Chong be better and continue to be in the first place? Or would the shining new star Ji Tianxing replace Yuan Chong? Under everyone's gaze, Yuan Chong was the first to enter the void. He stood in the void with his arms crossed in front of his chest, revealing a confident expression and exuding an invisible majesty. Ji Tianxing entered the void with a calm expression and stood 10 miles in front of Yuan Chong. Before he spoke, Yuan Chong sneered and said, Ji Tianxing, all of us have underestimated you. I didn't expect you to be able to win all the way until now and even have the chance to fight with me. However, meeting this seat, your luck ends here. Ji Tianxing glanced at him and said in a calm tone, "Unfortunately, it's your misfortune to have met me." Chapter 2195. Ji Tianxing's expression and tone were very calm. He was neither bluffing nor shouting. It was as if he was stating a fact. Because of this, Yuan Chong frowned and his face was as cold as ice. Since the beginning of the sacred assembly, Ji Tianxing's performance had made him feel deeply afraid and threatened. He had purposely said those words just now to bluff and boost his confidence. However, Ji Tianxing was still as arrogant as ever, which made him furious. He didn't want to waste any more time. With a clang, he pulled out his sword and shouted coldly, "Ji Tianxing, cut the crap. I'd like to see if your strength is worthy of your arrogance." Ji Tianxing naturally didn't bother to argue with him. He didn't use the burial of heaven sword either. He made a sword sign with his right hand and pointed to the void. "Sword, come." Following his cold shout, a cold silver light immediately lit up in the void above his head. Swoosh! 1,000-meter-long starry sword, carrying a mountain-sized white tiger phantom, descended from the sky and slashed down. Roar! The white tiger phantom was quite lifelike, exuding a murderous aura that could destroy everything. Yuan Chong was enveloped by the cold and sharp sword intent. He felt a stabbing pain all over his body as if his skin and flesh were about to burst open. He clenched his teeth and held the sword with a gloomy face. He used all his strength to counterattack. Scattered stars chess piece. With a cold shout, he waved his sword and slashed out hundreds of silver sword lights. They intertwined into a big net in the void and formed a mysterious sword array. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. More than 600 silver sword lights, like dazzling starlight, were arranged in a special way and flew back and forth as fast as lightning. Yuan Chong was in the middle of the sword array. He could attack or retreat. Kaboom! In the next moment, the white tiger sacred sword fell from the sky and slammed into the scattered stars chess piece sword array. There was a thunderous sound. Suddenly, the silver starlight bloomed, and the silver light fragments covered the sky. A silver shockwave spread out like a wave and spread in all directions. The white tiger phantom and the giant sword were both destroyed and quickly dissipated. The scattered sword formation was also shattered, and Yuan Chong was forced to retreat over 10 miles. Fortunately, the sword formation blocked most of the white tiger sacred sword's power. Moreover, he had a high-grade saint artifact to protect him. That was why he had managed to escape unscathed. After the shock wave swept out, Yuan Chong's figure appeared. He held the sword in his hand and stood in the void, panting heavily. His eyes were like knives as he stared at Ji Tianxing. His eyes were filled with fear. The strongest defense is actually offense. As this thought flashed through his mind, he decided not to passively defend anymore. Instead, he decided to go all out and take the initiative to attack. Solitary star fiendish moon. Yuan Chong's voice was as loud as a large bell. Dazzling starlight burst from his body as he gripped the sword with both of his hands and fiercely hacked out a 3,000 meters long beam of light. The light blade was like a crescent moon cutting through the void, bringing with it a bone-chilling chill as it slashed down towards Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing's expression did not change as he calmly said, "A firefly dares to compete with the bright moon?" Yuan Chong was only a martial sage, but he was able to absorb and use the power of the stars. That was unbelievable. That was why he had been able to suppress Tai Hao Yunqi, Atal, and the rest and had been ranked first in the sacred assembly. However, the star martial skill that he had cultivated was created by martial god Tianju and he had personally taught it to him. To Ji Tianxing, the star martial skill that martial god Tianju had created was too crude. Vermilion bird sacred sword. He stared coldly at Yuan Chong as he raised his right hand and pointed at the void. Suddenly, the void lit up with dazzling sparks, forming a 3,000 meters long giant sword. The giant vermilion bird phantom slashed down viciously. The power of the stars was also divided into yin and yang. The sun star and the ordinary stars belonged to yin while the power of the sun star belonged to yang. Ji Tianxing's vermilion bird sacred sword was formed by the sun true fire and its power was extraordinary. Kaboom! In the next instant, the vermilion bird sacred sword and the white moonlight blade collided and a loud explosion shook the void. In that instant, the white moonlight blade shattered. The vermilion bird phantom and the giant flaming sword also collapsed. Billions of crimson and silver-white fragments of light burst forth in the void, like the most brilliant fireworks, causing people to gasp in amazement. The 30-odd martial sages on the round plate were all dazzled by this scene. Their faces were filled with astonishment. Even the powerful veteran martial sages were full of admiration as they whispered in each other's ears. It is indeed a battle between the strong. It is so exciting. With Ji Tianxing and Yuan Chong's strength, they have both mastered the power of the stars. It is unbelievable. The power of the stars is more powerful than the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. It is also more difficult to refine and absorb. There is a risk of being burned to death. I wonder how they have mastered it. The two of them seem to be evenly matched. It is hard to tell who will win. Although I think highly of the fourth prince from the current situation, it seems that Ji Tianxing has the upper hand. Don't forget that Yuan Chong has used a sacred artifact. Can be said that he has gone all out. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, didn't even use a single saint artifact. Just as the crowd was discussing, the starlight in the void dissipated. They saw Ji Tianxing standing in the same place, unharmed. Yuan Chong's hair was disheveled as he stood in the void 80 miles away. Blood was still dripping from the corner of his mouth. Although he didn't look injured on the surface, in reality he had already suffered internal injuries from the shock. Before he could make another move, Ji Tianxing used a secret technique and attacked him. Azure Dragon's Sacred Sword. Ji Tianxing raised his finger again, and a giant sword that was 1,000 feet long descended from the sky. It carried the shadow of a green dragon and slammed down. The Azure Dragon's Sacred Sword's aura was full of divine majesty and had the power to suppress everything. Yuan Chong's expression was solemn. He had no choice but to take out a silver cauldron to block the sacred sword's attack. Boom! The sword light exploded and the Azure Dragon Phantom dissipated. The silver cauldron was also sent flying. Yuan Chong's body shook again and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Ji Tianxing did not give him any time to suppress his injuries. He raised his hands again and used a mysterious technique. Sword rain. As he shouted, tens of thousands of starlight sword lights appeared in the void and poured down like a storm, drowning Yuan Chong's figure. Bang! 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 A series of muffled booms rang out incessantly, causing ripples to appear in the void. Yuan Chong tried his best to block with all his means and Dharma treasures. However, the starlight sword lights formed a sword formation under Ji Tianxing's control and continued to stab him, making it impossible for him to defend. In just 20 breaths of time, Yuan Chong was stabbed hundreds of times by the sword lights. His golden robe had long been torn and his protective soft armor was also broken. There were wounds on his chest, back and limbs and blood kept spurting out. Seeing this scene, many martial sages sighed silently. Everyone knew that Yuan Chong was about to lose. In terms of strength and attainments in sword Dao, he was far inferior to Ji Tianxing. Yuan Jin frowned and stared coldly at the void, paying attention to the situation of the battle. At this moment, seeing that Yuan Chong was in a difficult situation and his injuries were worsening, he finally made up his mind. A cold light flashed in his eyes. He ordered Qin Jing behind him in a cold and indifferent tone, "Do it." Qin Jing had been waiting for this moment. When he heard the order, he did not hesitate to withdraw his left hand into his sleeve. He grabbed an exquisite palm-sized jade pendant and crushed it. This jade pendant had a strange structure. It was connected to the void platform's formation and could be used to control the formation. Chapter 2196. Without any warning, the void crack and the hurricane appeared at the same time. Ji Tianxing's figure was immediately swallowed by the hurricane and disappeared into the pitch-black void crack. Swoosh! More than a dozen terrifying void windstorms surged out of the void crack and wreaked havoc on the void platform like tornadoes. Even a martial sage expert could not withstand the power of the void windstorms and was about to be crushed into pieces. Ji Tianxing's starry sword light had already collapsed and dissipated. Yuan Chong, who was covered in blood, was finally out of danger. He rushed out in a sorry state, his hair disheveled and his expression sorrowful and terrified. There was not an inch of his body that was unharmed. However, he did not have time to catch his breath or suppress his injuries. Just as the thought of being relieved of a heavy burden appeared in his heart, it immediately dissipated. He saw with his own eyes that several huge void windstorms were sweeping toward him and were about to swallow his figure. At this moment his eyes suddenly widened and a look of realization flashed across his eyes. He subconsciously turned his head and looked at Yuanzhen, who was on the white light disk. Obviously he guessed that Ji Tianqing's disappearance and the appearance of the void windstorms were definitely not coincidental. It was his big brother Yuanzhen who had manipulated them. He was both shocked and angry, and a strange thought flashed across his mind. Damn Yuanzhen. In order to deal with Ji Tianqing he is even willing to sacrifice my life? Damn it. He must have calculated that as long as he can kill Ji Tianqing, even if he has to sacrifice me, the Divine Son Father will not pursue him. In the next moment, a void windstorm thousands of feet high swallowed Yuan Chang's figure. He was seriously injured and had no time to dodge or escape. He was immediately torn into pieces by the void windstorm. Even if he was a martial sage expert and had an extremely strong physical body, in the void windstorm he was still as fragile as paper. Without the protection of his physical body, his divine soul did not last long before it was swallowed by the void windstorm and completely disappeared. Yuan Chong died. His physical body and divine soul both collapsed and dissipated. More than a dozen void windstorms raged on the void platform for 100 breaths of time before they gradually subsided. As for the many martial sages on the round plate, they were all dumbfounded by the scene before them. Everyone's eyes widened as they stared at the void platform in shock. They were so shocked that they couldn't speak. A moment ago Ji Tianqing and Yuan Chong were still fighting fiercely in the sky, using their amazing secret arts. But now Ji Tianqing had been swallowed up by the void crack, vanishing without a trace. Yuan Chong was even killed by the void storm, not even leaving behind a trace of him. The void gradually calmed down and returned to its cold and dark state. However, the shock in the hearts of the many martial sages did not subside for a long time. At the edge of the disk, Lu Baishuang, Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian stared at the sky in shock. It's over. Young Master Ji has been swallowed by the void. What's going on? Why is this happening? Mu Changtian and Zhuo Mingqi were filled with grief and indignation as they shouted in confusion. Lu Baishuang pursed her lips tightly, her body trembling, and she could not help but shed 2 lines of tears. Why is this happening? What's going on? Young Master Ji, why is he being swallowed by the void? Her eyes were lifeless as she murmured, her voice low and sorrowful. Seeing Ji Tianqing being swallowed by the void, her mind and strength seemed to have been sucked away. The other martial sages gradually regained their senses as they discussed in shock and confusion. Oh my god. Why would there be a crack in the void? The 4th prince and Ji Tianqing were fighting for first place. Why would they both vanish? It's over. The 4th prince has been killed by the void storm and Ji Tianqing has been swallowed by the void. He will definitely die. Many years ago I heard that the void platform had been damaged and its power had become unstable. There have been many accidents. I just didn't expect that there would be an accident today. It was not only the martial sages on the disc who were discussing with mixed feelings. Even the hundreds of thousands of martial artists on the Sky City Square gradually recovered from their shock and silence. Everyone exclaimed in shock and helplessness as they whispered to each other. No one could accept this. This sudden calamity actually ruined the most exciting duel, taking away the lives of 2 genius martial sages. At this moment Yuan Zhen, who was on the white disc, finally recovered from his shock. He stared at the void with bloodshot eyes and roared hysterically. 4th brother. This sincere cry was full of sorrow and regret, causing the hearts of many martial sages to tremble as sorrow welled up in them. Why is this happening? 4th brother, why is the heavens treating you like this? It's all my fault. I didn't supervise you properly and caused you to suffer such a disaster. Yuan Zhen bent over in pain as he roared in tears, as if he was extremely sad about Yuan Chang's death. Qin Zheng, who was standing behind him, saw Yuan Zhen's sorrowful look and hurriedly comforted him. 1st prince. My condolences. This is an unexpected situation. It's not something you can control. Don't blame yourself. Qin Zheng supported Yuan Zhen and comforted him with a sincere tone. However, Yuan Zhen seemed to be too sad. He cried for a long time and only calmed down when his voice became hoarse. The more than 30 martial sages on the disc all had heavy hearts. Martial Saint Qing Shan, Chao Ying and the others all comforted Yuan Zhen. Yuan Zhen gradually woke up. He suppressed the sorrow in his heart and wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes. He walked back to the center of the disc with heavy steps and announced with a solemn expression, "Everyone, this sacred assembly has ended. Unfortunately, there is no first or second place in this sacred assembly. As everyone knows, the void stage was damaged hundreds of years ago and its power is very unstable. Although the craftsmen of our country tried their best to maintain and repair it, it was to no avail. Occasionally, unexpected situations would occur. Unfortunately, an accident happened today and caused the death of Yuan Chong and Ji Tianxing. This, perhaps, is the will of the heavens. The heavens are jealous of the talents." Yuan Zhen was silent for a long time as if he was too sad to speak. Lu Baishuang, who had been in a daze and tears, suddenly rushed out of the crowd and shouted at Yuan Zhen, "No. Ji Tianxing is not dead. He will definitely not die. This is not an accident. This is your conspiracy. You want to kill him. You want to kill him on purpose." As soon as she said this, the martial sages on the disc all quieted down. Everyone turned their heads and looked at Lu Baishuang with a strange expression. Yuan Zhen glanced at her and said indifferently, "Holy Emperor Baishuang, Ji Tianxing was swallowed by the void storm and will die without a doubt. You have deep feelings for Ji Tianxing. I can understand your feelings. Just like how my fourth brother died in an accident, I am so sad that I wish I were dead. However, I hope you can stay rational and not go crazy. Don't slander me." Chapter 2197. Yuan Zhen's expression and tone were both calm and cold. The martial sages could not help but nod in agreement. They all began to reprimand Lu Baishuang. "Holy Emperor Baishuang, everyone can understand that you're overly sad. However, it's too unreasonable for you to pester endlessly like this. You slandered His Highness for plotting to kill Ji Tianxing. However, His Highness Fourth Highness also died in an accident. Does His Highness want to harm his own brother? His Highness has always been generous and kind. He loves his brothers and sisters even more. Everyone saw that His Highness Fourth Highness died in an accident. His Highness is heartbroken and in great pain. Holy Emperor Baishuang, you have lost your mind. His Highness did not care about your slanderous words. Why don't you thank him? Where are the people of Luoshui Divine Nation? Take Holy Emperor Baishuang away. Don't let her fool around here." The martial sages all began to reprimand Lu Baishuang. They even asked Zhou Mingqi and Mu Chongtian to take her away. Zhou Mingqi and Mu Chongtian looked troubled. They sent messages to Lu Baishuang to console her. "Holy Emperor Baishuang, it has already happened. My condolences. Maybe the heavens are jealous of your talent. If young Master Ji is in heaven, he would not want to see you so sad." Lu Baishuang immediately turned to glare at the two of them. She shouted crazily, "Shut up. What nonsense are you two talking about? The heavens are jealous of my talent? I do not believe it. Young Master Ji will not die. He is definitely still alive. I also don't believe that this is an accident. Of all times, why did it have to happen now of all times? How can there be such a coincidence in this world?" Zhou Mingqi and Mu Chongtian were speechless. They did not know how to persuade her. However, Lu Baishuang's angry shout was heard clearly by the martial sages. The young martial sages from various countries shook their heads and started to discuss. "Sai, it seems like Holy Emperor Baishuang has been traumatized. Her mind is muddled. I didn't expect that this woman, who is as cold as a mountain, would be so sentimental. She is so infatuated. What a pity. People of Luoshui Divine Nation, what are you waiting for? Why aren't you taking her away? Are you going to let her go crazy here and embarrass your god nation?" Yuan Zhen saw that everyone was attacking Lu Baishuang one-sidedly, and his eyes flashed with an imperceptible sneer as he thought to himself, fourth brother, if you want to put on a show, you have to go all the way. Only the trick of injuring oneself to gain the enemy's confidence is the most convincing. I believe that your spirit in heaven will forgive Big Brother for doing this. By sacrificing you, we can kill Ji Tianxing and obtain the mystery of ascension that Godfather wants the most. Godfather will thank you for your sacrifice." After the thought flashed through his mind, he announced in a loud and expressionless voice, "Everyone, I'm not feeling well and I'm not in a good mood. I still have to prepare for my fourth brother's funeral, so I'll take my leave first." After saying that, Yuan Zhen waved his hand and cast a spell, activating the formation on the disc. And after passing through this light gate, they would be able to return to Wangtian City. Seeing that Yuan Zhen and Qin Jing were about to leave, the martial saints shook their heads and prepared to leave. But at this moment, Lu Baishuang angrily rushed out and blocked the door of light, blocking Yuanzhen's path. Yuanzhen, how could you just walk away like that after such a big matter? Ji Tianqing is our nation's heavenly imperial guardian. Don't you have anything to say to him? Yuanzhen stopped and looked at her expressionlessly. He shouted, I've already said that this was an accident. Ji Tianqing was swallowed by the void. Everyone saw it with their own eyes. Now that things have come to this, what explanation can I give you? You're crazy. I have been patient, but you want a yard. If you continue to pester me, don't blame me for being impolite. Qin Zheng also stepped forward and glared at Lu Baishuang. Lu Baishuang, you have heard His Highness' words. Get out of the way or I will not be polite to you. Lu Baishuang immediately sneered. Ha! So you have shown your true face? I want to see how you are going to be impolite. In any case, I won't leave until I get to the bottom of this matter and find Ji Tianqing. All the martial saints present today will not leave either. The martial saints frowned and stared at Lu Baishuang angrily. Hey, you crazy woman, what do you want to do? This is the Heaven's End Divine Kingdom, not the Luoshui Divine Kingdom. You can't behave so atrociously here. Ji Tianqing died in an accident, but you want to stop all of us. You are simply unreasonable. Why are you still talking nonsense with her? Throw her out of the void stage. The Saint Emperor of the Luoshui Divine Kingdom is crazy. How ridiculous. Qin Zheng took advantage of the crowd's discussion to cast a meaningful glance at several young martial saints. Suddenly, the young martial saints who were filled with righteous indignation joined forces to capture Lu Baishuang. But at this moment Taihao Yunqi, who had been silent, suddenly spoke. Wait. His voice was not loud, but it contained a powerful calmness and confidence. He walked out of the crowd with Jujiu, came to the white light door and stood beside Yuanzhen. The martial saints of the various countries quieted down and looked at him with confusion. Yuanzhen also stared at him and asked, Taihao Yunqi, what do you want to say? Taihao Yunqi revealed a faint smile and said in a calm tone, Yuanzhen, what happened just now was out of everyone's expectations. But you insist that it was an accident and come to a conclusion with just a few words. Isn't this too hasty? Yuanzhen raised his eyebrows and asked coldly, Taihao Yunqi, what do you mean? Do you want to slander me too? Oh no. Taihao Yunqi shook his head and said with a smile, before there is conclusive evidence, I will not suspect anyone. But what I want to say is that this matter should not be handled this way. Yuan Chong was killed by the void storm in front of everyone's eyes. But Ji Tianqing did not die on the spot. He was just swallowed by the void and disappeared without a trace. Regardless of whether this matter was plotted by someone or just an accident, it was definitely related to the Heaven Extinction Divine Nation. Yuanzhen, as the host of the Sacred Assembly, you can't stay out of this alone. Hearing his words, the 30 or so martial sages fell silent. Yuanzhen could not refute and could only frown and ask, Taihao Yunqi, what do you want? Taihao Yunqi said with a serious face, it's very simple. Please fulfill your duty and responsibility as the host of the Sacred Assembly and send martial saints into the void to search for Ji Tianqing. After all, he is the heavenly imperial guardian of the Luoshui Divine Kingdom. Whether he is dead or alive, the Heaven Extinction Divine Kingdom must find him to give the Luoshui Divine Kingdom an explanation. Chapter 2198. Taihao Yunqi's identity was different from an ordinary martial sage. Moreover, what he said was reasonable. Even Yuanzhen could not refute his words. Lu Baishuang, Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian immediately agreed with him. That's right. What the seventh godson said is exactly what we are thinking. What the seventh godson said is what the host of the Sacred Assembly should do. This should be the responsibility of the Heaven Extinction Holy Nation. This matter has nothing to do with the seventh god's son. What he said is just and reasonable. The martial sages of the various countries fell silent and looked at Yuanzhen to see how he would respond. Yuanzhen furrowed his brows, weighing the pros and cons in his mind. Qin Zheng, who was eager to protect his master, quickly asked, Taihao Yunqi, it's easy for you to say that. As everyone knows, the void storm is extremely terrifying and martial sages are no match for it. Ji Tianqing has been swallowed by the void storm and has been smashed into pieces. Where can we find his body? Moreover, the void is vast and boundless. Even if we send martial sages, where can we find him? If those martial sages die in the void, won't more people be implicated? Martial sage Qing Shan, Chao Ing Qinyu and the others nodded in agreement. Taihao Yunqi shook his head and said solemnly, Ji Tianxing is not an ordinary martial sage. He may not die in the void storm. Even if he dies, there will be some traces left behind. At least some fragments will be left behind. For example, haven't you been trying to find the whereabouts of the divine sword, the burial of heaven? If the divine sword, the burial of heaven, is in his hands, even if it is in the void, it will not be damaged. Hearing his words, a cold light flashed in Yuanzhen's eyes and he thought to himself, damn bastard, he has already guessed it? Damn it. In fact, even if Taihao Yunqi did not ask him to send people to search for Ji Tianxing, he would enter the void to find him. That was because he wanted to confirm whether Ji Tianxing was dead or not. He also wanted to find the divine sword, the burial of heaven. That was the reason why he was in a hurry to leave the void stage. However, now that Taihao Yunqi had interfered, things had become even more complicated. Taihao Yunqi saw that Yuanzhen was silent and continued, as for the problem that Lord Qin mentioned, it is even easier to solve. I have a magic weapon given to me by the Father God, which allows me to travel unimpeded in the void. Why don't I accompany your country's martial sage into the void to search for Ji Tianxing? A cold light flashed across Yuanzhen's eyes and he immediately made up his mind. He raised his head to look at Taihao Yunqi and said expressionlessly, Seventh Godchild is right. I should be responsible for the accident that happened to Ji Tianxing during the sacred assembly. I should send someone. Oh no, I should personally enter the void to search for him. Regardless of whether he is dead or alive, I will be able to answer to the Luo River God nation. I don't need to trouble the seventh son of God. I also have a magic treasure that can travel freely in the void. Hearing his words, Qin Jing frowned. The martial sages of the various countries heaved a sigh of relief and looked relieved. Even Lu Baishuang, Zhuo Mingqi and the other two looked relieved. Taihao Yunqi nodded slightly and said, Yes, your highness is wise. That is good. The martial sages present are all witnesses to this matter. We will stay as witnesses and wait for the results. The martial sages of the various countries who had just relaxed tensed up again. Many of them frowned and protested. Seventh son of God, you are making things difficult for us. Yes, your highness is going to search for Ji Tianxing. You can just stay as witnesses. Why do you want us to stay? I have important matters to attend to and I am in a hurry to return to my country. How can I delay here? Taihao Yunqi looked around and said with a smile, We will see the results in 1 or 2 days. Since all the martial sages have time to attend the sacred assembly, how can you not even have 2 days? Moreover, Ji Tianxing has always been good at creating miracles. Don't you want to see with your own eyes that he has miraculously survived in the void? Hearing his words, the voices of the martial sages who objected immediately weakened. Many of them were dissatisfied but they could not say anything. Therefore everyone stayed on the white light disk and waited quietly. Yuanzhen cupped his hands towards everyone and said expressionlessly, Everyone please wait here. I will bring people into the void to search for Ji Tianxing's whereabouts. Let's set the deadline as 2 days. After 2 days I will come back to report the results to everyone. After that he led Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city governor into the white light gate and left the void platform. After the three of them left, discussions began to break out on the silent round plate. More than 30 martial sages were whispering to each other. Lu Baishuang calmed down and looked grateful. She bowed to Taihao Yunqi and said, Baishuang thanks the seventh son of God for speaking up for us. Holy Emperor Baishuang, you are too polite. Please get up. Taihao Yunqi nodded at her and gestured for her to get up. Jiu held Lu Baishuang's arm and said with a smile, Holy Emperor Baishuang, you don't have to be so polite. You are Tianxing's friend and so are we. Seventh brother and I don't believe that this is an accident, and we don't believe that Tianxing has died. However, our abilities are limited. This is all we can do. Lu Baishuang shook her head and said, No, you have done very well. Unlike me, I was so anxious that I was at a loss of what to do. Young Master Ji is really lucky to have the two of you as his friends. Jiu pursed her lips and thought for a while. Then she said with a smile, Perhaps it is our luck to be his friend. In the dark and cold void, a blurry golden light was floating in the boundless darkness. It was flickering and fluctuating. Upon closer inspection, one could see that there was a young man covered in blood and with messy hair wrapped in the golden light. His white robe was already in tatters, and there were only a few rags hanging on his waist. His dark golden jade-like body was also covered in cracks. After an unknown period of time, the golden light gradually became brighter like a ray of sunlight. Swoosh! The young man in the golden light sat up. His body was stiff as he turned his head to observe the situation around him. Phew! When he saw that he was surrounded by the cold and dark void, he let out a long breath. A look of relief appeared on his face. Fortunately, I am still in the void and did not fall into the black hole or the abyss of the void. Then he activated the heaven-mending pearl in his mind and released a gentle white light to quickly repair his body. After a short 2 hours, the cracks and wounds all over his body were miraculously healed. He became spirited again and was full of energy. He muttered to himself, "Luckily, I had the foresight to cultivate the holy sword body in advance. That's why I wasn't killed by the void storm. Yuanjin, that bastard is really vicious." Chapter 2199. Ji Tianxing was swallowed by the void first. But before he was sucked into the void, he saw what happened to Yuan Cheng. Of course, the void storm was terrifying. Those who were not martial gods could not resist it. But he was lucky. He had prepared for a rainy day and had already cultivated the holy sword body. So he was only covered in wounds in the void storm and did not lose his life. Yuan Cheng was not as lucky as him. He was torn to pieces by the void storm on the spot. Not even his bones were left. The so-called accident was all bullshit. Ji Tianxing never believed in accidents. Before the sacred assembly began, he had guessed that Yuanjin would not be content and would plot against him. The moment the void storm appeared, he was very sure that Yuanjin had made his move. At this moment, Burial of Heaven's voice sounded in his mind. Yuanjin is indeed vicious. Fortunately, you had foresight. Otherwise, you would have died this time. Ji Tianxing smiled and said in a playful tone, "I won't die. Even if I didn't cultivate the holy sword body, don't I still have you?" Indeed, if he did not cultivate the holy sword body, he would have hidden in the sword of Burial of Heaven when the void storm swallowed him. With the material and grade of the sword of Burial of Heaven, it would not be destroyed by the void storm. Burial of Heaven was silent for a moment and said in a serious tone, "Yuanjin dared to attack you in front of everyone. It means that he is confident. He is sure that you are Kenshin and the sword of Burial of Heaven is in your hands. So he did not hesitate to take the risk to kill you and snatch the sword of Burial of Heaven." Ji Tianxing nodded and said with a cold smile, "If it was just him, he would not have the guts. I'm afraid his father is behind him." Martial God Tianju? Burial of Heaven paused and said in a cold tone, "Among the 3 martial gods, only he is ambitious and dares to plot against you. When you return to the immortal state, you must not let him go. No matter what, you must kill him to prevent future troubles." Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said, "Of course. Back then, martial god Tianju didn't dare to offend me, so I didn't take it to heart and didn't want to kill him. But it's different now. Since he dared to make a move against me, he's courting death. However, it's still too early to say this. I have to figure out where this is and return to Sky City as soon as possible." "Return to Wangtian City?" Burial of Heaven was startled. He asked in confusion, "That's Yuanjin's territory. Why did you go back? Wouldn't that give him another chance to make his move? What's more, he'll definitely treat it as an accident, and you won't be able to confront him." Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and said with bright eyes, "No, that's not the case. Yuan Chang's death and my unexpected disappearance will definitely cause a storm. No matter how much Yuanjin tries to cover it up, some people won't let it go just like that. They'll definitely make a big fuss." "Who?" Burial of Heaven was full of doubts and couldn't understand. Ji Tianxing chuckled and said, "That silly woman Lu Baishuang. There's also Taihao Yunqi and Jiujiu. They won't sit idly by." Burial of Heaven thought for a moment and said in a strange tone, "I can understand why Taihao Yunqi and Jiujiu would stand up for you. As for that Lu Baishuang, aren't you thinking too much?" Ji Tianxing wasn't embarrassed. He shook his head and said, "No, you don't understand her. That silly woman is cold on the outside but warm on the inside." Burial of Heaven chuckled and said, "Well, you're really in love, Dat. Since that's the case, let's determine the location first and then try to return." Ji Tianxing turned his head and looked at the void behind him. In the distant darkness there was a huge star, shining with golden light. There was no doubt that it was the world he was in before. A playful smile appeared on his face as he shook his head gently and said, Don't worry. Maybe someone will come to take us back soon. Burial of Heaven was startled for a moment and asked in confusion, "Who will take you back?" Ji Tianxing looked at the star with a sneer and murmured, "Look, aren't they already here?" As his voice fell, a few white lights lit up in the void in front of him and rushed over as fast as lightning. In just a few dozen breaths, the white lights arrived in front of him. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The white lights faded away and 3 figures appeared. The leader was a young man in a silver robe with a dark golden dragon cloak on his shoulder. It was Yuan Jin. Behind him were 2 middle-aged men. One was more than 2 meters tall, burly and muscular, wearing a bright silver armor and a dragon feather 9-star helmet. The other man was of medium build, wearing a sapphire blue robe and had a square face. There was no doubt that these 2 were Qin Zheng and the Sky City Lord. Ji Tianxing's cold eyes swept across the 3 of them as a sneer appeared on his face. Yuan Jin, Qin Zheng and the other 2 sized up Ji Tianxing from head to toe. Seeing that he was unscathed, they couldn't help but reveal a look of surprise and disbelief. "Ji Tianxing, I didn't guess wrong. You actually survived. The void storm swallowed you, but you're still safe and sound. It's really incredible." Yuan Jin stared coldly at Ji Tianxing and said in a low voice. Ji Tianxing chuckled and said, "What? Seeing that I'm still alive, you must be very disappointed, right? I've long guessed your thoughts and schemes. How could I not be prepared?" Yuan Jin immediately shook his head and asked, "Ji Tianxing, what do you mean by this? When you were fighting with Yuan Chong, an accident happened in the void platform which led to you being swallowed by the void. In the past few hundred years, the power of the void platform has been unstable and accidents often happen." "Oh? Accident?" Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and said with a faint smile, "Then what do you mean by bringing people here now?" Yuan Jin answered without hesitation, "Of course I'm here to search for you and bring you back." "Is that so?" Ji Tianxing sneered and said indifferently, "Yuan Jin, put away your hypocritical face. This is the boundless void. Other than the 4 of us, there's no one else. You don't have to act anymore. Just do it directly and save everyone's time." Yuan Jin pretended to be confused and asked, "I'm hypocritical? Why would I do it to you? Do you know that after you were swallowed by the void, Lu Baishuang of the Luoshui Divine Kingdom went crazy and pestered me endlessly? Even Taihao Yunqi and Taihao Jiujiu didn't hesitate to become enemies with me and asked me to send people to search for you. I personally entered the void to find you. Of course I have to bring you back to answer to them." No matter how Yuan Jin explained, Ji Tianxing didn't believe him. "Yuan Jin, everyone is well aware of what you're trying to do. If you don't do it now, you won't have another chance in the future." Yuan Jin saw that his attitude was firm and didn't waver at all. He couldn't help but frown and his eyes gradually turned cold. "Since you're so stubborn, don't blame me for being rude. Anyway, you were swallowed by the void storm and were smashed to pieces. This is something everyone knows." Chapter 2200. Yuan Jin could no longer keep up the act. He could only tear off his disguise and reveal his true face. His eyes and expression became cold, and his body emitted an undisguised murderous aura. Qin Zheng and the Sky City Lord took out their weapons and Dharma treasures and spread out. The 3 of them formed a triangular formation surrounding Ji Tianxing in the middle. An invisible force field quietly formed, enveloping the void within a radius of 100 miles. Ji Tianxing didn't care at all. He stared at Yuan Jin with a cold smile and said, "That's right. Why waste time pretending?" Yuan Jin raised his eyebrows and said coldly, "Ji Tianxing, now that you're in the void, no one can save you. I really don't know where your confidence comes from. You're about to die, yet you're still so arrogant?" Ji Tianxing was stunned and asked, "Where did my confidence come from? Don't you know it?" Yuan Jin sneered. "Huh. Is your confidence because you're Kenshin's reincarnation? Or is it because of the sword of burial of heaven in your hand? You can't be so naive as to think that we'll be afraid of you just because you're Kenshin's reincarnation, right? With your strength, even if you can defeat Yuan Chong, you're definitely not our match." Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and nodded. "That's right. The 3 of you are stronger than Yuan Chong. If you join forces to attack me, it looks like I have no chance of winning." Yuan Jin corrected him coldly. "It's not that you have no chance of winning, but that you have no way of surviving. Since you know your own strength, then things are easy. I'll give you a chance to live. If you know what's good for you, then obediently hand over the sword of burial of heaven." He added, "Don't play tricks. Don't think that I'm that idiot Chu Yun Saint Emperor. A fake sword of burial of heaven can't fool me. Hearing his words, Ji Tianxing immediately understood what was going on. Before Chu Yun Divine Emperor was killed, Yuan Zhen had already investigated him. Hee hee. Ji Tianxing sneered. His right hand emitted a black light as he held the Burial of Heaven sword in his hand. He said coldly, "The Burial of Heaven sword is here. Come and take it if you have the ability." Yuan Zhen's body shook when he suddenly saw the pitch-black and simple Heaven Burial sword. He stared at the Heaven Burial sword and observed it carefully. Although he was very sure that the sword of Burial of Heaven was in Ji Tianxing's hands. But before this he had never seen it with his own eyes. Now that he saw the sword of Burial of Heaven, he was completely relieved and couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Ah, I didn't guess wrong. The sword of Burial of Heaven is really in your hands. All of my efforts were not in vain. Yuan Chang's sacrifice was worth it." At this moment he didn't have to pretend and endure any longer, and he'd completely revealed his true colors. "The sword of Burial of Heaven is mine. Your life is also mine." Yuan Zhen took out an ancient halberd that was more than 10 feet long and shouted with murderous intent, "Kill!" At the same time he held the ancient golden halberd with both hands. In an instant dozens of dark golden flowing lights were shot out toward Ji Tianxing. Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city governor also attacked at the same time. They used their secret techniques and slashed out dozens of sword lights. Suddenly, colorful magical power brilliance lit up the void for hundreds of miles. Violent dermic power fluctuations filled the entire area, suppressing Ji Tianxing fiercely. Facing the siege of 3 powerhouses, Ji Tianxing was fearless. He said proudly, "Finally, I don't have to hide my strength anymore. I can go all out." "Celestial Dragon Tyrant Body," Ji Tianxing shouted in a low voice. Golden light burst out from his body and he exuded an unparalleled domineering aura. In the next moment his body expanded violently and turned into a golden giant with a height of 10 feet. His aura and combat strength also increased by 6 times in an instant, reaching an extremely terrifying level. Heavenly Dragon Slash. Facing the sword lights and sword shadows that came down from the sky, he held the sword of Burial of Heaven with both hands and slashed out a huge sword light. The giant golden sword, which was thousands of feet long, slashed the golden light and sword shadows with the power to destroy everything. Bang! 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 A deafening sound burst out and resounded through the void. Yuan Zhen's dark golden flowing lights and Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city governor's sword lights were shattered on the spot. The giant sword's power didn't decrease at all and continued to slash toward Yuan Zhen. The terrifying sword intent shrouded Yuan Zhen, causing his expression to change drastically. His eyes were filled with horror. He looked up at the giant sword that came down from the sky and couldn't help but roar. He used this sword technique on the void platform before, but it was definitely not this powerful. The same technique, but now the power has increased by several times? How is this possible? How can he hide it so well? Only now did Yuan Zhen realize that Ji Tianxing didn't use his full strength at all when he fought on the void platform. Right now he was truly using his full strength. Well, Ji Tianxing was so cunning. He probably hadn't used his full strength now. Only he himself knew his true strength and his limits the best. Thinking of this, Yuan Zhen actually felt a trace of panic in his heart. But he immediately calmed down. He held the ancient halberd with both hands and raised it above his head, emitting a golden light that shot into the sky. Battle dragon across the sky. Along with his angry roar, the ancient halberd began to emit a golden light that transformed into a mountain-like dragon that blocked the void. Boom! Amidst a deafening boom, the gigantic sword struck the golden dragon shadow, sending out golden light that blotted out the sky and covered the earth. The giant sword and the dragon shadow shattered at the same time, turning into billions of golden light fragments that scattered in the void. An incomparably powerful impact force blasted Yuan Zhen flying backward for more than a dozen miles, his complexion becoming deathly pale. His Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city lord's joint attack formation was immediately broken. Ji Tianxing was about to chase after Yuan Zhen and take advantage of the situation to attack him. Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city lord saw that the situation was not good. They rushed over without thinking about their own safety and stood in front of Ji Tianxing. Sky-flipping seal. The Wangtian city lord formed a seal with both hands and released a vast amount of spiritual power. It condensed into an ancient seal character that was as big as a mountain and pressed down on Ji Tianxing. Qin Zheng also waved his sword and stabbed out hundreds of cold light beams, forming the Big Dipper sword formation and enveloping Ji Tianxing. "How dare you stop me with such a petty trick?" Ji Tianxing shouted angrily. He clenched his left hand into a fist and punched out a huge fist shadow that blasted toward the sky-flipping seal. Star-shattering fist. The starry fist hit the ancient seal character hard. With a dull bang, the two broke at the same time. Ji Tianxing then waved the Burial of Heaven sword and slashed out 49 starry sword lights. They formed a mysterious formation and stabbed at Qin Zheng's Big Dipper sword formation. Ping 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 ping, muffled sounds exploded one after another, and the sword lights that filled the sky suddenly collapsed and exploded. In the blink of an eye, the attacks of Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city lord were all broken by Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing then waved his palm and hit out a dragon claw that blotted out the sky and the sun. Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city lord were sent flying. With no more obstacles in front of him, his figure flashed and teleported 30 miles, rushing to the front of Yuanzhen. God-slaying sword. Chapter 2201. Yuanzhen had just stabilized himself and was adjusting his spiritual power. He had thought that Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city lord could stop Ji Tianxing. At the very least, they could stall Ji Tianxing for a few breaths. Only then would he have time to catch his breath and come up with a countermeasure. But he had not expected that Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city lord could not stop Ji Tianxing and were sent flying in 2 moves. Seeing the giant sword coming at him, Yuanzhen's expression turned extremely serious. His eyes burned with an unyielding will to fight. Heaven battling dragon soul. He roared at the top of his lungs. Holding the halberd with both hands, he stabbed at the sword radiance with all his might. At this moment he used all his strength to release a vast amount of spiritual power and infused it into the halberd. The halberd expanded to 10 feet long and shone with a sacred and ancient light. It stabbed out a giant shadow of a double-headed dragon. The double-headed dragon shadow was 10,000 meters long. It was dark gold and covered in hideous scars. It exuded a majestic and murderous aura. The dragon shadow bared its fangs and brandished its claws. In the most ferocious and overbearing manner, it hit the giant sword head-on. Kaboom! Amidst a thunderous boom, the 2-headed dragon shadow was split into 2 by the giant sword and exploded into fragments that filled the sky. Of course, the giant sword's power was also weakened by more than 50%. Bang! The giant sword landed squarely on Yuanzhen and sent him flying away once again, rolling and falling into the void tens of miles away. He was still tumbling in the void. Dark red blood was spurting out of his mouth, nose, and orifices. Between his forehead and chest, there was a long and thin crack, from which blood was constantly seeping out. He lowered his head to look at his chest and saw that under the blood-stained silver robe, the dark golden soft armor had already cracked open. The holy void armor, an upper-grade sacred artifact, could not stop his sword. As expected of the sword of burial of heaven. Its power is terrifying. Yuanzhen murmured to himself. His voice was filled with shock. Fortunately, he was wearing the holy void armor. That was why he was only injured and survived. If he didn't have this soft armor, he would have been cut in half by that sword and his body would have collapsed on the spot. Thinking of this, a trace of fear gushed out from the bottom of Yuanzhen's heart. But what followed was an even more resolute killing intent and hatred. He has reincarnated and has just broken through to the martial sage realm not long ago. Yet he already possesses such terrifying strength. If we don't get rid of him when he returns to God realm, I'm afraid even Father God won't be his opponent. Understanding this, Yuanzhen became even more wary of Ji Tianxing. At the same time, Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city lord pounced on Ji Tianxing, attacking him from both sides. Both of them disregarded their own safety and used their ultimate moves, hoping to delay Ji Tianxing's footsteps and buy time for Yuanzhen to recuperate. Zidian Wild Thunder. Shadowless Fatal Blow. The Wangtian city lord formed a seal with both hands and struck out 9 ancient seal characters. 9 purple thunderbolts were released and blasted towards Ji Tianxing. Qin Zheng's body turned into an illusory black shadow and flashed around Ji Tianxing. At the same time, 7 shadows appeared and stabbed out hundreds of cold light, attacking Ji Tianxing's vital points. Ji Tianxing calmly responded. His left hand struck out the heavenly dragon palm and slapped towards the Wangtian city lord. The 9 bolts of purple lightning struck him, but they were swallowed and dissolved by him. They did not cause any harm to him. On the other hand, the Wangtian city lord was hit by the heavenly dragon palm. He spat out blood and let out a painful scream. Ji Tianxing waved his sword and slashed out a crescent-shaped star sword. It swept around him and smashed all 7 of Qin Zheng's shadows. Although a few cold light blades pierced him, they were all shattered and did not leave a mark on his body. He was in the state of the heavenly dragon tyrant body. His defense was so strong that it made people speechless. Qin Zheng's unique skill was broken, but he did not retreat. He once again used another unique skill and attacked Ji Tianxing. The Wangtian city lord also flew back and rushed towards Ji Tianxing without fear of death. He launched a desperate attack. The 2 sides fought fiercely in the void, releasing dazzling magic light shadows and constantly colliding with terrifying shock waves. The 3 figures kept teleporting. Their speed was too fast for the naked eye to follow. It was impossible for the naked eye to capture their movements. In just 10 breaths of time, the 3 of them had exchanged more than 50 moves. Ji Tianxing had only used 30% of his spiritual power and was slightly injured. His white robe was a little tattered. However, Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city lord's injuries were too horrible to look at. They were in an extremely sorry state. Both of them were in ragged clothes and covered in blood. There were at least a dozen hideous wounds on their bodies. Especially Qin Zheng. His entire left leg was cut off and blood had already soaked the hem of his robe. Although both of them had paid a heavy price and their strength had been greatly weakened. However, they succeeded in stalling for time and bought time for Yuanzhen to catch his breath. Yuanzhen had finally suppressed his injuries. He regained his vigor and rushed over with a murderous aura. However, at this moment Ji Tianxing's eyes flashed with a sharp cold light. He brazenly used his unique skill. Burial of Heaven. He held the sword of Burial of Heaven with both hands and exploded with an extremely violent spiritual power. He used all his strength to slash out a mysterious pitch-black giant sword. Bam! In the dull loud sound, the pitch-black giant sword slashed Qin Zheng. This time Qin Zheng was not lucky enough to escape. He was split in half by the giant sword. He was split from head to toe and a large amount of blood splattered out. The incomparably sharp sword Qi minced the 2 halves of his body into minced meat and blood rain, scattering in the void. Not only was his body destroyed but his bones were also destroyed. Even the divine soul in his mind did not manage to escape in time and was split into 2 halves. Qin Zheng, a level 7 martial sage, the dignified commander of the divine guards, died under the sword of Burial of Heaven and fell in the void. This sudden scene stunned Yuanzhen and the sky-gazing city lord. Both of them were horrified. They widened their eyes in disbelief and cried out in grief and anger. Lord Qin. Ji Tianxing. You bastard, you killed Qin Zheng. After shouting angrily, Yuanzhen and the Sky City Master regained their senses and rushed towards Ji Tianxing even more furiously. Ji Tianxing glanced coldly at the 2 and sneered, "If you want to kill me, you should be prepared to be killed by me." As he spoke, he waved his palm and shot out a colorful lightning beam towards the Sky City Master. The Sky City Master had just rushed over and was about to perform a secret seal when he was hit by the 5-colored lightning. Boom! The sound of thunder exploded and shook the void for hundreds of miles. The dazzling 5-colored lightning instantly engulfed the Sky City Master. His robes, his soft armor, and his long hair were all reduced to ashes by the lightning. Even his body was turned into charcoal by the 5-colored lightning and countless black ashes splattered out. He flew out in a sorry state and fell into the void 10 miles away. Yuanzhen looked at him and found that he had been twisted into a ball, like a piece of charcoal with black smoke billowing out. Chapter 2202. Yuanzhen was a little dazed, his mind almost blank. He led Qin Zheng and the Sky City Lord into the void in a threatening manner. Originally he thought that victory was in his hands, and that he would definitely be able to kill Ji Tianxing and obtain the Burial of Heaven sword. But now Qin Zheng was killed and the Sky City Lord was also crippled. Even he himself had suffered serious injuries. And yet Ji Tianxing was unscathed, still looking calm and composed. This ending was the complete opposite of what he had expected. He could not believe it. Even if you're the reincarnation of Kenshin, you shouldn't be this strong. Even the Kenshin of the past couldn't be this sick. Why? I was so wise and my plan was flawless, but in the end it turned out like this? Why is this? Yuan Jin glared at Ji Tianxing, gritting his teeth and growling in a low voice. Ji Tianxing ignored him, raised his left hand again, and punched at the Sky City Lord who had turned into charcoal. Bam! The black charcoal shattered on the spot, crumbling into pieces and scattering in the void. This time the Sky City Lord's body was also destroyed, and his soul was destroyed. In the void only Ji Tianxing and Yuan Jin were left. Ji Tianxing looked at him expressionlessly and said indifferently, "Your two lackeys are dead, now it's your turn." Yuan Jin's body stiffened and a hint of fear flashed in his eyes. But he was unyielding and said firmly, "No matter how strong you are, you will die today." As he said that, he slowly stretched out his left hand, and a dense golden light lit up in his palm. A dark golden talisman appeared, floating in front of him. This half-foot-long talisman was engraved with mysterious patterns, exuding a mysterious and powerful aura. Yuan Jin's face was serious as he pinched his fingertip, forcing out a drop of dark red blood, and dripped it on the talisman. The talisman shone brightly, burning into a wisp of golden flame, and burrowing into his body. Suddenly Yuan Jin's body began to swell and distort, the lines of his muscles bulging, and his bones elongated, making crisp cracking sounds. His aura was surging wildly and his strength was rising steadily. In a short span of 2 breaths, he had transformed into a 30-foot-tall giant that resembled an iron tower. His strength had also skyrocketed by 6 times, reaching the peak of the 9th level of the Martial Saint realm, nearing the limits of the Martial Saint realm. The injuries that he had suffered earlier had also disappeared, and they could no longer affect him in the slightest. He became majestic again and shouted with a strong fighting spirit, "This God Annihilation Curse is a life-saving trump card given to me by Father God. Can help me break through my limits. For more than 300 years, no one has ever been able to force me to this point. Ji Tianxing, you are very strong, but I will still kill you." As he spoke, he waved his left palm and unleashed an overwhelming golden light that swept towards Ji Tianxing. He brandished the ancient halberd with his right hand, and 2 golden dragon phantoms shot out towards Ji Tianxing. Dragon extermination. At this moment, a resplendent golden light illuminated the void within a radius of 300 miles. The 2 mountain-sized golden dragon phantoms also released a power that could destroy everything, enveloping Ji Tianxing. Looking at the golden light descending from the sky and the 2 golden dragon phantoms that were attacking him from the left and right, Ji Tianxing said calmly, "It looks like this is your final trump card, your strongest move. Although it is very strong, it is a pity that you will still have to die." Saying thus, he gripped the sword of burial of heaven with both hands, a focused expression on his face as he slashed out with all his might. First sword cleaving heavens. At this moment his magic power and essence, chi and spirit merged into one, condensing a supreme sword intent as he executed this sword of utmost sincerity. Yuan Jin could clearly feel that as Ji Tianxing executed this sword, his entire person had become divine and ethereal. It was as if he had ascended to the unparalleled realm of divinity. Yuan Jin was shocked and terrified, unable to comprehend exactly what kind of wondrous sword art could actually cause such a transformation. Boom! There was an earth-shattering explosion as the sword of heaven-cleaving heavens shattered the 2 golden dragon phantoms, splitting the sky-covering golden light in half. Yuan Jin couldn't dodge in time and was struck by the sword head-on. Bang! With a muffled sound, blood splattered everywhere as he was sent flying while vomiting blood. His silver robe and golden soft armor also shattered into countless pieces, scattering in the void. Before Yuan Jin fell into the void, Ji Tianxing swung the sword of burial of heaven again and stabbed at him from afar. Stab sword. A speck of cold light flashed in the void. In the next moment the cold light hit Yuan Jin and exploded in his chest. Boom! A giant silver mushroom cloud rose into the sky, illuminating the void with a blazing white light. A wash-basin-sized hole appeared in Yuan Jin's chest. His bones and organs were clearly visible. Dark red blood gushed out like a small stream and sprinkled in the void. His body was severely injured and almost destroyed on the spot. His strength was also weakened to the extreme. The unparalleled pain made him scream uncontrollably. His voice was especially shrill. Ji Tianxing teleported 25 miles without any expression and caught up with him in an instant. He slashed at him again with his sword. It's time to end this. He let out an indifferent roar and slashed out a dazzling starry sword. The great star sword was about to hit Yuan Zhen and destroy his body and soul on the spot, killing him on the spot. But right at this moment a sudden change occurred. 100 miles behind Yuan Zhen in the empty void, a sacred golden light suddenly lit up. It was a giant golden palm the size of a mountain. It had 6 fingers and each finger was the same length. The giant golden palm tore through the void and blocked in front of Yuan Zhen, slamming into the starry sword with a bang. Bam bam. The starry sword was shattered on the spot, but the golden palm was unscathed and shone even brighter. Yuan Zhen, who had narrowly escaped death, was lucky to survive. He fell into the void and didn't have time to check his injuries. He looked at the giant palm in shock. After clearly seeing the appearance of the giant golden palm, he immediately let out a sigh of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. His tensed mind also relaxed. Ji Tianxing also stopped chasing and frowned as he stared at the golden palm. 6 fingers. And the same length? He raised his eyebrows and sneered. He said to Yuan Zhen in a disdainful tone, "No wonder you dared to attack me and tried to kill me in the void. Just as I expected, it turns out that you have the greatest backing." Yuan Zhen raised his palms and channeled his magic power. He used a ball of green light to cover his chest and abdomen. He smiled coldly as he suppressed his injuries. Ji Tianxing, it seems that I can't hide anything from you. If that's the case, you should know that you can't escape today. No matter what, you can't go back alive." Ji Tianxing stood in the void, holding the sword of burial of heaven in his right hand. He pointed at the void below his feet and stared at the golden palm. He said in a playful tone, "So what if he attacked?" Chapter 2203. Ji Tianxing had guessed that martial god Tianju was behind Yuan Zhen when he first landed in the empty space. Therefore, when the 6-fingered palm appeared, he was sure that martial god Tianju had made a move. Only martial god Tianju could send a giant palm across the empty space to block Su Mo's sword skill. This was something that a martial sage could not do. Ji Tianxing had just broken through to the martial sage realm and could not fight against a martial god. However, he knew that martial god Tianju was still in the Holy Kingdom and could not come to kill him personally. A giant palm across the empty space could only save Yuan Zhen but could not threaten him. Yuan Zhen also understood this point. His expression froze and fear flashed across his eyes. However, he refused to show his fear and sneered confidently, "Ji Tianxing, your arrogance has broken through the sky. After all, you are just a martial sage. Even if you can kill Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city governor, you can't fight against a martial god. Even a martial god realm expert could crush you to death with a single finger. There is only a one-word difference between a martial sage and a martial god. However, you should know the difference in strength better than anyone else." Ji Tianxing knew the difference in strength between the two realms. However, he knew that Yuan Zhen was just putting on a brave front. Since you treat your father like a god, I'd like to see if your father can save your life." As soon as he finished speaking, Ji Tianxing swung the Heaven Barrier sword and slashed at Yuan Zhen. White Tiger Sacred Sword. 1,000-meter-long silver-white sword light slashed down from the sky toward Yuan Zhen along with the silhouette of a white tiger as large as a mountain. Before the sword radiance arrived, the terrifying sword essence and killing intent had already enveloped him. Yuan Zhen's expression changed and fear flashed across his eyes. He was severely injured and had no strength to fight back. As long as he was hit by the White Tiger Sacred Sword, he would definitely die. At this critical moment, he could only place all his hopes on the giant golden palm. Swoosh! The giant golden palm did not disappoint him. It immediately lit up with a bright golden light and slapped the White Tiger Sacred Sword. Boom! The giant palm and the sword radiance collided and there was a deafening explosion. Golden and silver light shards flew everywhere. The shadow of the white tiger was destroyed and the 1,000-foot-long starry sword radiance shattered into countless pieces. Of course, the giant golden palm was also cut off by 30%. 2 fingers were cut off and the light became dimmer. A violent shockwave spread out and swept Yuan Zhen flew into the empty space far away. He spat out a mouthful of blood from the impact of the shockwave. His consciousness was blurred and his injuries worsened. He finally regained consciousness after he was sent hundreds of miles away. He turned his head to look at the void and saw that the giant golden palm was damaged, but it was still blocking Ji Tianxing's attack. The two of them were locked in a fierce battle. Seeing this, Yuanzhen immediately made up his mind. Run. The giant golden Zhu Tianju's juju. Zhu Tianju's yuju could not chew, his rights. Zhu Tianju's Yui Yuanzhen endured his injuries and took out a palm-sized black boat. He formed a seal with both hands and channeled a vast amount of spiritual energy into the boat. Instantly, the small boat expanded by 1,000 times, turning into a pitch-black flying boat that was 100 meters long. The boat was a special sacred weapon. It was used for traveling and could travel unimpeded in the empty space at an extremely fast speed. Without hesitation, Yuanzhen got into the flying boat and drove it back, fleeing as fast as a bolt of lightning. In the empty space not far away, Ji Tianxing was still entangled with the giant golden palm. Seeing Yuanzhen escape, his eyes were filled with murderous intent. He wanted to chase after Yuanzhen and kill him on the spot. However, the giant golden palm stopped him with all its might. Even if the sword radiance cracked it, it would not back down. After all, the giant palm was just a divine skill cast by martial god Tianjue. It was formed by divine power and had no life or consciousness. Even if it collapsed, it would not cause any harm to martial god Tianjue. Green Dragon's Sacred Sword. Sky-breaking sword. Ji Tianxing kept roaring as he used one divine skill after another to attack the giant golden palm with all his might. After a dozen breaths, the giant golden palm finally could not hold on any longer. Crack crack. With a series of crisp cracking sounds, the giant golden palm collapsed and turned into billions of golden fragments that scattered in the empty space. In the end, as Ji Tianxing had mentioned, even martial god Tianjue could not do anything to Qin Nan with his giant palm. Only martial god Tianjue could kill him. After the giant golden palm was destroyed, the empty space returned to its calm and dark state. Ji Tianxing flew away without hesitation toward the star shrouded in golden light. I have fallen out with Yuanzhen, and even martial god Tianjue has attacked. From now on, I will be at odds with Tianjue divine nation. I can't let Yuanzhen escape. I can't let him go back alive. Ji Tianxing murmured to himself. His face was cold and his eyes were filled with murderous intent. He flew toward the world of 5 elements as he searched for Yuanzhen. However, Yuanzhen had already escaped far away. Moreover, he used the black flying ship as a cover and did not leave any traces. Ji Tianxing searched for 100 breaths but still could not find Yuanzhen. Just as Ji Tianxing sped up, the dark empty space in front of him suddenly rippled. Swoosh! A gap was torn open in the empty space and a dazzling golden light shone. The sudden golden light passed through the gap and landed in the empty space in front of Ji Tianxing. After the golden light faded, a tall middle-aged man in a golden robe appeared in front of Ji Tianxing. The tall and burly middle-aged man was covered in a layer of faint golden light and exuded a sacred and domineering aura. His face was cold and dignified. The contours of his face were as sharp as a knife. His long and narrow eyes flashed with a sharp and threatening cold light. The dark golden robe he wore was embroidered with the pattern of 2 dragons and a phoenix. The collar and sleeves were embroidered with stars and clouds. He wore a dark golden crown that was more than a foot tall on his head. It was inlaid with 9 gems of different colors, all exuding a mysterious and vast aura. Most importantly, both of his hands under his wide sleeves had 6 fingers. Seeing the sudden appearance of the golden-robed man, Ji Tianxing immediately stopped in the empty space. His face became solemn. His pupils constricted as he frowned and sized up the golden-robed man. A strange look flashed in his eyes. Tianju. It's him. He actually came to the empty space to kill me. This thought flashed in Ji Tianxing's mind. He immediately tensed up and his eyes were filled with hostility and vigilance. However, after careful observation, he realized that the figure in front of him was not the real body of martial god Tianju. It was a doppelganger of his divine soul. This result made Ji Tianxing secretly heave a sigh of relief. It was good that it was not the real body. Then he still had a chance of survival. At this time, Tianju's doppelganger looked at him with burning eyes and a cold smile appeared on his face. Chapter 2204. The tone of Tianju's avatar was a little strange. At first glance, it sounded like an old friend who had not seen each other for many years and was exchanging pleasantries. There was excitement and disbelief as well as some emotion. However, Ji Tianxing could feel that Tianju's avatar's tone was condescending and gloating. After all, when he was Kenshin, he had shocked the world and suppressed the three great martial gods. Even if martial god Tianju did not accept him, he would not dare to offend him. Now more than 1,000 years had passed. Kenshin, who was once incomparably glorious, had experienced death and rebirth, becoming a young man who had just broken through to the martial sage realm. Tianju was still a high and mighty martial god, one of the most powerful overlords of the Five Elements world. One could imagine how Tianju was feeling at the moment. Ji Tianxing was well aware of it, but he did not show it on his face. He was still calm and indifferent. He looked at Tianju's avatar and said calmly, "Since you have seen through my identity, there is nothing to say between us. You controlled your avatar to stop me. If you want to catch up with me or mock me, you don't have to do that. You are not my friend and you are not worthy of catching up with me. You once bowed and bent your knees in front of me, and I have also reached the top of the world. You are not qualified to mock me." Tianju's avatar immediately narrowed his eyes, and the sneer on his face deepened. He looked at Ji Tianxing mockingly and nodded. Not bad, Kenshin is indeed Kenshin. He was still as condescending and arrogant as he was in the past. Yes. Back then you were the best in the world and I was just a martial god. How could I be qualified to be your friend? Moreover, you have ascended to the upper world and ruled over the 10,000 gods. I am just a small martial god and I am no different from an ant in your eyes. Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly, "It's good that you understand." Ha ha. Martial god Tianju raised his head and laughed, and his tone was indescribably proud and contemptuous. But don't forget, no matter how glorious and noble you were, it is all in the past. You're only a martial saint now. You can't even be considered an ant. The person that this god once looked up to and revered is now right in front of me. This god can crush him with a single finger. Tell me, isn't this laughable? Wasn't it ironic? Martial god Tianju clasped his hands behind his back and paced back and forth in the void, laughing crazily. Ji Tianxing was expressionless as he looked at him indifferently. He asked, "Back then I was ranked at the top of the Five Elements world and my might shook the world. However, I didn't stay in this world for long before I ascended and left. Even if I didn't give you any pointers back then, I didn't suppress you, nor did I have any enmity with you. I don't understand. Why do you hate me so much to the point of annihilating me and not even sparing the orthodoxies under my sect?" Martial god Tianju continued to circle around Qin Nan. He paced in the air and said in a deep voice, "If you had really fallen in the past, you would have only left your reputation and glorious achievements. Even if I refuse to accept you, I will still revere you from the bottom of my heart. But not only did you ascend alone after you fell in the upper realm, you were reborn. Do you know how hateful it is? Do you know how envious it is? For tens of thousands of years, all the martial gods were trapped in the Five Elements world. They couldn't escape the 10,000 years limit and could only turn into dried bones and yellow sand. You were the only one who successfully ascended to the upper realm, peeked into the true divine Tao and became the supreme divine king. This is hateful enough to drive me crazy with jealousy." Ji Tianxing already knew this. He nodded slightly and said, "You didn't want to die. You didn't want to be trapped in the Five Elements world like the previous martial gods and die in the 10,000 years limit. You were ambitious. You only wanted to leave the Five Elements world and ascend to the upper realm. You also wanted to step into the true divine path and become the divine king who could command the galaxy and rule over 10,000 gods. Therefore you secretly attacked my disciples and destroyed the piece of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains just to find the mystery of my ascension." Martial god Tianju nodded without hesitation and said coldly, "That's right. You clearly knew the method of ascension, but you were selfish and didn't want to share it. This is the original sin." Hearing this, Ji Tianxing's eyes flashed with a trace of contempt. Martial god Tianju's face was filled with resentment. He continued, "Later you finally fell. After the news spread, I was also extremely shocked. I even felt pity and sorrow. Because I know that after you die, the method of ascension that you mastered is likely to be lost. It was also because of this reason that I didn't have much hope. When I sent people to search for the mystery of ascension, I didn't destroy the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. If it wasn't for my mercy, the Pillar of Heaven's mountains would have been destroyed." Ji Tianxing shook his head and sneered, "No, you didn't destroy the Pillar of Heaven's mountains not because of your mercy. It was because you still had hope and a trace of fantasy. You always thought that I would leave the mystery of ascension behind and pass it to my disciples or hide it in the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. Once you destroyed the Pillar of Heaven's mountains, your hope would be completely destroyed. Martial God Tianju was startled. He glanced at him sharply and sneered. I really can't hide anything from you. I didn't expect you to be the one who understands me the most. Ji Tianqing showed a disdainful expression and said coldly, how can your ugliness and despicableness escape my eyes? Martial God Tianju was not angry. He sneered and asked, do you know the real reason why I have to kill you even though I have no enmity with you? Ji Tianqing said indifferently, because although I fell I didn't truly disappear. I was reborn and rose up in an even more monstrous manner. You were mad with jealousy and hatred. You spent your entire life and couldn't even ascend to the upper realm, let alone understand the mystery of life and death and reincarnate. But I had everything as if I was the luckiest person in the world. You were jealous, angry, and unwilling to accept this. Therefore you wouldn't let me rise up again and you wouldn't sit and watch me return to the peak. You wanted to kill me and take away everything that belonged to me. Not only the way to ascend to the upper realm, but also the mystery of reincarnation. Martial God Tianju heard this and laughed wildly again. The one who understands me is Kenshin. That's right. You're absolutely right. The heavens are unfair and cut off my path to ascension. I have to go against the heavens and seize a chance to live. No matter how strong you are, Kenshin, you're just a lucky person under the heavens. Only I, Yuan Tianjue, am the most talented and bold overlord. His deep and vigorous voice reverberated in the void. It was deafening and domineering. However, after Ji Tianqing heard his words, he shook his head and laughed out loud with a heart full of pity. Actually, you're not a talented and bold overlord. You're just a narrow-minded and selfish fool. You think your heart is higher than the heavens, but in my eyes, you're just a frog at the bottom of a well, a pitiful worm who feels sorry for himself. Chapter 2205. What did you say? Tianju's clone's expression suddenly changed. He stopped sneering and glared at Ji Tianqing angrily. His whole body was wrapped in a layer of raging anger, his eyes were gloomy as ice and his tone was angry and low. Ji Tianqing was not afraid at all. Instead he looked at him with even more contempt and said in a sonorous voice, the heavenly Tao is incomplete, but the divine Tao is infinite. You are trapped in a low-level world and you are only fighting for fame and fortune your whole life. At most you can only seek the path of ascension. You complain that the heavenly Tao is unfair, but you don't even understand what the heavenly Tao is. You are just a frog in a well, but you boast that you have the ambition to devour the heavens. Isn't that ridiculous? I once reached the peak of the divine Tao and ruled over thousands of gods. In the morning I went to the origin star sea and in the evening I went to the burial star river. When I was in the mood I sang with the sun star and raised my cup with the moon star. When I was moved by emotions, I plucked the 18 stars of the heavenly dipper to make a pearl chain and the 36 stars of the earthly fiend to carve a pendant. The heavenly Tao is supreme, the universe is vast, and the mystery of the divine Tao. How can you imagine all of this? Speaking of the past, Ji Tianqing's clothes fluttered in the wind, and he was in high spirits. His whole body exuded a transcendent aura of a ruler looking down on all living things. Even Tianju's clone was moved. He looked at him quietly, and the corresponding scene in his mind was filled with yearning and longing. However, Ji Tianqing's tone became more and more bleak as he spoke. He finally waved his hand and chuckled self-deprecatingly. What's the use of telling you this? Isn't it like talking to a summer bug? Although he was mocking himself, his eyes were full of pity when he looked at Tianju's clone. That was from the heart and soul, just like a god looking down on mortals and ants. Between the two, from vision, knowledge, life and soul, they belonged to different levels. Tianju's clone suddenly flew into a rage. He only felt that he had received the greatest and most unforgivable insult in his life. Ji Tianqing. You lowly idiot, you bastard. The current you is the lowliest ant in front of this god. This god is the high and mighty martial god, and you are just a piece of meat on the chopping block, a reptile that this god can crush at will. Ji Tianqing saw that he was about to go crazy, and the corner of his mouth hooked up into a cold smile. Is that so? I poked at your sore spot, no wonder you flew into a rage. His tone was very calm, as if nothing had happened. However, the more martial god Tianju acted like this, the more furious he became. He cursed with a ferocious face, bastard. No matter how eloquent you are, you will still die today. No matter how glorious you were in the past, You can't change the fact that you're going to die. Didn't you think that you were superior and aloof from worldly affairs? After I kill you, I'll take away your memories, the method of ascension and the mystery of reincarnation. At that time this god will also be able to ascend to the higher realms, ascend to the peak of the divine Tao, and become a divine king worshipped by all gods. No. This god will definitely be more outstanding than you. I will be able to compete with the heavenly Tao and hold the billions of stars in my hands. Martial god Tianju's long hair fluttered as he roared loudly. Having said that, he suddenly stretched out his palms and struck out a dazzling golden light toward Ji Tianxing's head. Everything will belong to me. You can die now. The dazzling golden light that covered the sky suddenly formed hundreds of golden light swords. Terrifying divine power burst out and shrouded Ji Tianxing's body. Ji Tianxing looked up at the sky calmly. His left hand formed a sword art while his right hand waved the Burial of Heaven sword. He used all his strength to defend himself. Even though he had the memories and knowledge of a divine king, he had regarded martial god Tianju as a frog in a well and a lowly ant. However, he was only a martial sage now. If he could not defend himself against the attack of Tianju's avatar, he would definitely die today. Ancestral swords. Ji Tianxing's face was cold as he shouted. He waved the Burial of Heaven sword and pierced out starlight, forming a huge mysterious seal. Suddenly, tens of thousands of starry giant swords condensed in the void in all directions. Swish, swish. Countless starry swords flew over and danced around him, forming a huge sword array. The circular sword formation was like a ball of light, tightly protecting Ji Tianxing. Bang 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 bang. Over 100 golden swords slashed down, ruthlessly slashing at the starlight sword array, causing a series of loud noises to erupt. The terrifying sound waves spread out in the void, causing ripples to form in the surrounding thousands of miles. The giant golden swords were all shattered, turning into golden light spots that filled the sky and dissipated in the void. The sword formation formed by tens of thousands of starry swords was also shattered, turning into billions of starlight and dissipating. Thief! Ji Tianxing spat out a mouthful of blood. Clutching the sword of Burial of Heaven with both hands, he was sent flying backwards. After flying for over 100 miles, he finally came to a stop. His entire body flickered with a golden light that flickered unsteadily. His chest rose and fell rapidly, and his back was hunched as he panted violently. His long hair hung down loosely, covering his pale face. There was a burning pain in his 5 viscera and 6 bowels. His bones and meridians were stiff as if they were frozen, and he could not exert any strength. He slowly raised his head and stared coldly at Tianju's clone. He muttered to himself, even though my myriad star sword array is a divine path unique skill, 10 times more exquisite than martial god Tianju's divine skill, with his strength and knowledge, it is impossible for him to comprehend it. After all, I am only a martial saint and he is a martial god. Even if I used the holy sword body, I could not withstand a divine skill from him and was severely injured on the spot. Hateful, ridiculous. At this time, Ji Tianxing was in a difficult situation and he was full of helplessness. It was like a master of extraordinary swordsmanship who had lost all his power and became a cripple. He could not even defeat a soldier who had a rudimentary understanding of martial arts. This was the so-called one man can defeat 10 men. It was both sad and lamentable. In the void 100 miles away, Tianju's clone stared coldly at Ji Tianxing and sneered, "Kenshin, how do you feel now? This god can end your life with one more move. Even if you have great skills and vast knowledge and experience, you can't even keep your life now. You were boasting shamelessly just now. Isn't it ridiculous?" Ji Tianxing's expression was the same as before, still full of contempt and pity. An ant will always be an ant. Even if you are a martial god, you are just a slightly stronger ant. Besides, I have to say something. 1,500 years have passed, but you have not made much progress. Have you lived for such a long time in vain? You are courting death. Tianju's clone was enraged again. He raised his palms and slapped across the void. 2 mountain-sized golden palms, carrying a divine power that could destroy heaven and earth, slapped toward Ji Tianxing. These 2 golden palms were 10 times more powerful than the one that Ji Tianxing had shattered previously. Ji Tianxing was immediately in a desperate situation and was about to lose his life. At this critical moment, he raised his left palm with a determined expression and released a sacred golden flame. God-slaying spear. Chapter 2206. Boom. The god-slaying spear hit one of the giant golden palms, creating an earth-shattering explosion. The void within thousands of miles shook, creating layers of ripples. The dark golden spear and the giant palms collapsed at the same time. The two turned into rolling golden flames that spread out in the void. Ji Tianxing used his most powerful trump card and finally defeated one of the giant palms. However, the other giant golden palms had already reached him and was about to kill him. He no longer had the corresponding trump card to block the giant palms. At the moment of life and death, Ji Tianxing was surprisingly calm and his expression was still calm. The path of Dharma is the most holy, the void is the most hidden, the light sees the nature, the darkness sees the truth. He chanted a strange spell in his heart, and his hands formed a mysterious seal in front of his chest. Zhoosh. His body immediately turned transparent, as if he had merged with the dark void and disappeared. Not only could he not be seen with the naked eye, but his divine consciousness could not sense his aura. Even if he searched hundreds of miles, he could not find him. It was as if he had disappeared from the world. This was not an invisibility technique, nor was it a camouflage technique. It was a secret technique of the Paragon Sword body called Void Invisibility. Ji Tianxing created it himself. Zhoosh. The giant golden palms fell from the sky, crossing the dark void, passing through where Ji Tianxing had been and slapping downward. The void within hundreds of miles was squeezed open by the terrifying power of the giant palms, creating cracks and ripples. However, Tianju's doppelganger's attack missed. The giant golden palms flew thousands of miles in the void, and finally turned into specks of golden light and dissipated. Tianju's doppelganger was stunned and he frowned, confusion flashing through his eyes. How could he have dodged my attack? Well, the secret technique he used must have something to do with the power of space. He must have manipulated the power of space to break open the void and escape into an alternate space so that he could hide temporarily. Martial god Tianju was someone like him, so how could he not figure out the secret? In the blink of an eye, he guessed the reason for Ji Tianxing's disappearance, and his eyes immediately emitted a cold light. He raised his palms again and slashed at the void like blades. Space-shattering blade. A dense white light burst out from his palms, forming into two blades that were over 1,000 feet long. The blades slashed viciously at the space where Ji Tianxing was standing. With a loud boom, two huge cracks appeared in the dark void within a radius of 200 miles. Hundreds and thousands of strands of white light could be vaguely seen interweaving within the wide black crack. Martial god Tianju was very clear that the seemingly mysterious white light threads were actually the edges of the folded space. A folded alternate dimension was very complicated and dangerous. Once a martial saint expert fell into it, they would either be sliced into pieces by the edges of the space or be lost within, forever unable to leave. Even a martial god realm expert would not dare to enter the place recklessly. Otherwise they would still lose their lives. Only Ji Tianxing, with his special identity and the memories and knowledge of an unparalleled divine king, dared to use the folded space to hide. Tianju's clone's gaze passed through the two cracks in the void and searched for Ji Tianxing's traces in the folded space. 10 breaths later, the two cracks closed automatically, but he did not find Ji Tianxing. Therefore he used the space-shattering blade again and slashed at the void with his palms. Crack. Another loud explosion was heard and the void was split into pieces again. Thousands of strands of white light threads appeared, interweaving and folding in the darkness. Tianju's clone's gaze was like lightning as he searched for Ji Tianxing's aura with his mind sense. Suddenly, his mind sense detected a faint aura of Dharma power fluctuating in a ball of white light in the depths of the darkness. The aura fluctuated unsteadily, somewhat unstable and disorderly. Apparently, it had suffered serious injuries. Humph! You are indeed hiding here. Tianju's clone sneered as he raised his fists and punched at the cracks in the void. Two streaks of golden fist radiance condensed from divine power, carrying the power to destroy everything, passed through the cracks in the void and blasted at the ball of white light in the depths of the darkness. Bang! Bang! The next moment the two streaks of fist radiance hit the ball of white light, causing two earth-shattering explosions. Although the sound was weakened several times by the void, it was still deafening. The ball of white light was shattered into pieces and spread out in all directions. Ji Tianxing, who was hiding in it, also suffered a devastating blow. Immediately he was cut by the disorderly power of space and blood splattered all over his body. Fortunately, he had cultivated the sword body of Paragon, so he was able to resist part of the power. He was only cut and bruised all over and covered in blood. Otherwise, he would have been cut into pieces by the power of space and his corpse would have fallen into the disorderly space. Since martial god Tianju had seen through his plan, he could no longer hide in the alternate space. He had to endure the excruciating pain, explode with the last of his Dharma power, and desperately escape from the alternate space. Swoosh. The next moment, in the void thousands of miles away from Tianju's clone, a streak of white light suddenly lit up. In the white light, Ji Tianxing, who was covered in blood and disheveled hair, staggered out. His injuries were extremely miserable and his strength had been reduced by more than half. He was already an arrow at the end of its flight. He only turned his head and glanced at Tianju's clone, then turned and fled into the Five Elements world. The sword of burial of heaven turned into a 3-foot-long giant sword, shining with a sacred white light. He stood on the blade and used the sword-controlling technique, streaking across the void at the fastest speed like a meteor. Thousands of miles away, Tianju's clone saw the white light flying and immediately grinned hideously. Haha, the high and mighty Kenshin actually has such a day of embarrassment and humiliation. However, your embarrassment and humiliation are about to end. Since I've already made my move, how can I let you escape alive? While sneering, his whole body lit up with golden light, and he stepped across the void and chased after Ji Tianxing. He used the teleportation secret technique, seemingly taking a leisurely stroll, but in fact, every step he took was 300 miles away. After just a few breaths, he caught up with Ji Tianxing, and the distance between them was only 200 miles. The next step he could block in front of Ji Tianxing, use the ultimate killing move and kill Ji Tianxing on the spot. But something that Tianju's clone did not expect happened. At this moment, in the void in front of him, a circle of ripples swayed and a dazzling icy blue light lit up. When the icy blue light appeared, a cold and dignified woman's voice also came at the same time. Tianju, without my consent, you dare to touch the people of my kingdom of God. Do you want to be my enemy? With this cold shout, a graceful and elegant figure flew out from the icy blue light. This was a young woman in her 20s. She was tall and slender, wearing an exquisite and luxurious ice blue dress. She had a beautiful face, eyebrows like distant mountains, eyes like autumn water, and a cold and elegant temperament, like an otherworldly goddess from the 9 heavens. Chapter 2207. Tianju's doppelganger immediately stopped when he saw the blue-dressed woman. He furrowed his brows and stared coldly at the woman in the blue dress. His eyes were filled with shock. Luo Shui. You're here to stop me? And you're here with your real body? Without a doubt, the blue-dressed woman was Luo Shui, martial god. Moreover, she wasn't like Tianju, who only sent a doppelganger here. She was here with her real body. Luo Shui, martial god, stood proudly in the void and stared coldly at Tianju's doppelganger. She said in a deep voice, "So what? You?" Tianju's doppelganger had mixed feelings. He was shocked and angry. He asked coldly, "Weren't you in seclusion in the Divine Kingdom? When did you come out?" Luo Shui, martial god, sneered and asked back, "Do I have to report to you when I come out?" Tianju's doppelganger frowned and his eyes became gloomy. He thought to himself, "Damn bastard. I spent so many years of effort to send you to Luo Shui Divine Kingdom. I didn't expect that I couldn't even find out something as important as Luo Shui coming out of seclusion. You're going to ruin my plan today." Thinking of this, he gnashed his teeth in hatred and clenched his fists so tightly that they creaked. Luo Shui, martial god, asked in a dignified tone, "Tianju, it seems that you've forgotten the agreement between the 3 divine kingdoms. How dare you attack my heavenly imperial guardian? You're the sinner who started the war between the divine kingdoms by trampling on the agreement. Today, if you don't give me an explanation, I'll destroy your doppelganger. I'll take over the 6 eastern regions of Tianju's divine kingdom." Tianju's doppelganger's expression froze. He sneered, "Heavenly imperial guardian? What a joke. Everyone knows Ji Tianxing's real identity. Don't play dumb with me. He's Kenshin's reincarnation. Don't you know that? If not, why would you protect him like this and give him the title of Heavenly Imperial Guardian?" Luo Shui, martial god, sneered and said indifferently, "I don't know what you're talking about. Ji Tianxing was only a young martial saint in his 20s. He is the #1 god disciple of my Luotian mountain, as well as the #1 general of my Luotian divine nation. He has made world-shaking contributions and is my most valued right-hand man. You are the master of the heaven and divine nation, but you actually killed a junior. Such a method is truly despicable and shameless. Tianju's clone immediately looked up to the sky and laughed, saying in a mocking tone, Luo Shui, since you're pretending to be confused, this god won't talk nonsense with you. It's a pity that even though you're devoted and loyal to Kenshin, they treat you like dirt and discard you like a worn-out shoe. Not to mention spending time with you. Even when he ascended to the upper realm, he wasn't willing to bring you along. Now that he has been reborn, you still love him so much that you didn't hesitate to enter the void to protect him. He was heartless to you, but you gave so much to him. How foolish and laughable. The void was different from the five elements world. There was no heaven and earth spiritual chi, not even air. No matter if it was a martial saint or a martial god, entering the void was very dangerous. It would quickly consume one's spiritual power and affect one's martial arts foundation. Even a martial god expert would weaken his strength and realm if he entered the void too many times and for too long. Because of this, martial god Tianju only sent his clone here. Martial god Luoshui's real body came to the void to weaken his own strength imperceptibly, which was disadvantageous to him. She looked at Tianju's clone expressionlessly. After he finished speaking, she said indifferently, Kenshin has already fallen. The past is the past and I've already let it go. No matter how you ridicule me, I feel nothing. However, have you thought about the consequences of deliberately provoking me? Tianju's clone immediately frowned and asked with a guarded face, What? You really want to attack this god? If you stop now, this god can let Ji Tianxing escape back to the five elements world. If you insist on attacking, this god will no longer care about the alliance. When the two divine nations have a conflict, the Luoshui divine nation will only suffer. Luoshui, you must think carefully. Indeed, the Luoshui divine nation had just been invaded by the demon race army. After a cruel war, the Luoshui divine nation's talents and experts had withered. Now that they were recuperating, it was indeed inappropriate to start a war again. However, martial god Luoshui raised her eyebrows and sneered, Tianju, you're too conceited. You only sent a divine soul clone, but I'm here with my real body. If I want to destroy your clone, how many moves do you think it will take? You dare. Tianju's clone was instantly enraged and asked in a deep voice, Luoshui, what do you want to do? What do I want to do? Martial god Luoshui sneered. Of course, I want to uphold justice and urge your Tianju divine nation to do things impartially. Tianju's clone frowned again and showed a puzzled expression. What do you mean? Martial god Luoshui said slowly, First, Ji Tianxing is the heavenly imperial guardian of my Luoshui divine nation. You and anyone from Tianju divine nation are not allowed to attack him. Second, Ji Tianxing is participating in the divine martial sacred assembly, so he should take first place and receive the rewards he deserves. Third, let your son Yuanzhen announce the results of the ranking in public, restore Ji Tianxing's reputation, and apologize to Ji Tianxing in public. Tianju's clone sneered after hearing these three conditions. Humph, Luoshui, I think you're crazy. You dare to negotiate with me? First, second, and third? What a joke. Martial god Luoshui was not angry and said coldly, Is it? Okay, then I'll take you down first, then I'll negotiate with you. As soon as she finished speaking, she raised her hands and waved her sleeves, shooting out an overwhelming icy blue brilliance. Whoosh! The icy blue brilliance turned into a dozen icy blue light pillars that swept toward Tianju's clone. Tianju's clone's expression changed, and he immediately waved his palms, shooting out dozens of golden palm shadows. Bang! 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 The golden palms collided with the icy blue light pillars, creating a series of loud bangs and shattering at the same time. Tianju's clone was sent flying, his body trembling with golden light. Martial god Luoshui turned into a blue light and chased after him, waving his palms again. Boom! 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 The two sides fought in the void, creating earth-shattering noises and dazzling brilliance. Soon 30 breaths time passed. Martial god Luoshui and Tianju's clone exchanged more than 1,000 moves, and the winner was finally decided. The result was obvious. Tianju's clone was beaten black and blue, missing an arm and a leg. His body was full of cracks and his golden light dimmed. Martial god Luo Shui used a huge ice phoenix claw to capture him, making him unable to move or escape. Martial god Luo Shui said expressionlessly, "Tianju, you only have two choices now. Either you agree to my conditions or I'll destroy your clone. You spent a wisp of your divine soul and 300 years of hard work to refine this divine soul avatar." Chapter 2208. Martial god Luo Shui's tone was calm and indifferent. She did not pretend to be fierce or angry. But it was precisely because of this that martial god Tianju knew very well that she would definitely do as she said. Were those three conditions more important, or was the avatar more important? Tianju's clone fell into silence, hesitating and weighing the pros and cons. Indeed, martial god Luo Shui's request was excessive. Not only did she want Yuan Zhen to apologize to Ji Tianxing, but she also wanted to restore Ji Tianxing's reputation and give him the reward of first place in the sacred assembly. Although martial god Tianju did not care about the resources and pearls rewarded for first place in the sacred assembly. However, he had originally planned to give the pearl to Yuan Chong in disguise. But now Yuan Chong was dead and Yuan Zhen's plan had failed. Martial god Tianju had suffered a double loss, and he was so angry that he almost vomited blood. His main body was cultivating in seclusion, and only his avatar had entered the void to kill Ji Tianxing. However, martial god Luo Shui's main body had arrived and easily captured him. If he did not agree to martial god Luo Shui's conditions, this avatar would be destroyed. At that time, not only would his soul be affected, but he would also be unable to control his divine kingdom for a short period of time. After his seclusion ended, he would have to spend another 300 years to refine another avatar. It was time-consuming and exhausting. When he thought of this, martial god Tianju was in a dilemma, unable to make a choice. Martial god Luo Shui also saw his struggle and said coldly, "You only have 2 hours to consider. I'll take you back to Skygaze City first. I think that when you reach the void platform you will know what to choose." With that, she carried Tianju's avatar and flew through the void, flying toward the Five Elements realm at a speed faster than the speed of light. Tianju's avatar's eyes immediately widened in anger and worry. He was the noble ruler of the Tianju Divine Kingdom, yet he had been captured by martial god Luo Shui and escorted back to Skygaze City? Even if he was only an avatar when he appeared in front of everyone, it would definitely cause a huge uproar and make him a huge laughingstock. Once he appeared, this earth-shattering news would spread throughout the entire Shenwu continent. Even if one used their toes to think, they would know that he would become the object of ridicule and discussion among martial artists for countless years to come. The more Tianju's clone thought about it, the more upset he became. Finally, he could not hold back his anger and shouted angrily, "Luo Shui, you are really ruthless. But have you ever thought about the consequences of humiliating me like this?" "What consequences can there be?" The Luo Shui martial god sneered as he sped through the void. "It's nothing more than you taking revenge on the Luo Shui divine kingdom in your rage. However, your main body is still in seclusion and I don't know how many years it will take before you come out. At that time, the Luo Shui divine nation might not be afraid of you. Right now, you only have one divine soul avatar which you use to control the divine kingdom. However, I came out of seclusion in advance and acted with my true body. If I don't take advantage of you now, when will I?" "You." Tianju's clone was so angry that his whole body trembled, and his eyes were almost spitting fire. However, Luo Shui martial god was right. He had indeed lost. He lost because he couldn't come out of seclusion earlier than Luo Shui martial god. After a moment of silence, Tianju's clone suppressed his anger and said in a low voice, "Luo Shui, you win. This time I admit defeat and agree to your conditions." "That's good." Luo Shui martial god nodded and said expressionlessly, "It's useless to just agree. I have to take you to Sky-Gazing City and personally supervise you to fulfill my conditions. Don't worry, as long as you don't go back on your words, I won't throw you in front of everyone and make you lose face." Tianju's clone didn't answer but snorted coldly, full of anger. However, he was indeed relieved and thought to himself, "Luo Shui, this god will remember today's humiliation. When this god achieves great success and comes out of seclusion, I will take revenge tenfold. At that time, not only will I trample you under my feet, but I will also destroy the Luo Shui divine kingdom. As for Ji Tianxing, even if this god's main body doesn't come out of seclusion, I can still kill him. I won't let him live until then." Tianju's clone didn't speak anymore and remained silent. Luo Shui martial god also didn't say a word and hurried on with Tianju's clone. But in fact, there was a trace of coldness hidden in her clear and calm eyes, as if she had already made up her mind. Swoosh! Dazzling starlight streaked across the void like a meteor. In the silver light, it was Ji Tianxing whose white robe was stained with blood and his hair was disheveled. After escaping from Tianju's clone, he flew continuously for an entire day without stopping for a moment. At this time he was already very far away from the previous area and very close to the Five Elements world. Hundreds of thousands of miles ahead of them was a gigantic star shining with golden light. He turned his head and looked at the void behind him. Seeing that no one was chasing him, he gradually slowed down and relaxed his mind. Phew. Fortunately, martial god Tianju's clone didn't chase after me. He let out a long breath and hurriedly activated the power of the heaven-mending pearl, releasing a dense white light to cover his body and quickly heal his injuries. At the same time, the voice of the burial of heaven also sounded in his mind. The person who appeared out of thin air and blocked Tianju's clone seemed to be a woman? Ji Tianxing's body stiffened. After a moment of silence he nodded and said, "Yes, it's her." The burial of heaven said with a complicated tone, "I thought you didn't see her." So you already knew. Since she made a move, martial god Tianju's clone definitely can't escape. You're already out of danger. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and asked, "How can you be so sure?" "Of course." The burial of heaven said with certainty. Her clone was destroyed by the ancestor demon god long ago. Since she appeared now, it must be her true body. She will definitely win against Tianju's clone with her true body. Ji Tianxing said calmly. But everyone knows that if the true body enters the void, it will affect the foundation of the divine Tao and quickly weaken one's strength. The burial of heaven said with some anger, "Nonsense, she knows this better than anyone. But if she wants to save you, she will not care about the consequences and the price. Don't you know? It's fine if you pretended to be deaf and mute in your previous life, but in this life do you still want to let her down? Not to mention her, even my sword can't stand it anymore." Ji Tianxing shook his head and said calmly, "The past is the past. In this life I am only Ji Tianxing, not some Kenshin. I just want to accompany my wife and child. I don't want to owe anyone anything." The burial of heaven sneered and asked, "Huh, if that's really the case, then why did you stay in the Luo Shui Divine Kingdom? Why did you fight for the Luo Shui Divine Kingdom and repel the demon army? Do you dare say that you didn't do all this to make up for your regrets and repay her kindness?" Ji Tianxing remained silent and closed his eyes to circulate his energy. Chapter 2209. After an unknown period of time, burial of heaven carried Ji Tianxing and flew to the vicinity of the Five Elements world. 10,000 miles ahead was the golden light shield that enveloped the world. Burial of heaven stopped and transmitted his voice to Ji Tianxing. "The god seal is in front of us. If we want to return to the Five Elements world, I'm afraid it'll be a little troublesome." Ji Tianxing was closing his eyes to heal his injuries. Hearing burial of heaven's transmission, he opened his eyes and observed the golden light shield in front of him. He nodded and said with a solemn expression, "This golden light shield is the god seal. With our current strength, it's impossible to break it. Only by finding the gap in the light shield can we return to the Five Elements world." Gap. Burial of heaven thought for a moment and asked, "Like the gap we saw before, the one caused by the phantom star core? And the one in the north underworld mountain, under the ghost desert, the one caused by the wreckage of the divine warship?" Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said, "That's right. But don't worry, I still have a way to return to the Five Elements world quickly." "What way?" Burial of heaven asked. Ji Tianxing smiled and said in a mysterious tone, "Jiutian 10 Absolutes Tower." When he left Jiutian 10 Absolutes Tower, he had refined a small golden tower on the 5th floor of the tower and stored it in his sea of consciousness. He only needed to use his divine thought to communicate with the small golden tower, and he could return to Jiutian 10 Absolutes Tower instantly. Burial of heaven was relieved and said in a gratified tone, That's a good idea. You can return to Jiutian 10 Absolutes Tower with a thought. I just don't know if the small tower can still sense the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Tower when you're in the void now." Ji Tianxing said with certainty, "That Jiutian 10 Absolutes Tower is a king-grade artifact that can isolate the heavenly axiom. Even if I'm in the void, it shouldn't be a problem." Burial of heaven hurriedly urged, Then what are you waiting for? Hurry up and summon the small tower. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said with a smile, "Don't worry. Look at the void in front of us. Doesn't this golden light shield look a little familiar?" "What do you mean?" Burial of Heaven was a little confused, not understanding what he was trying to do. Ji Tianxing's smile became more and more playful. His tone was somewhat self-deprecating as he said, "I don't know if our luck is too good, or if we flew in the wrong direction when we were escaping. This void and this seal are a little familiar. It's not far from the ethereal star core." "There's such a thing?" Burial of Heaven was shocked. Ji Tianxing smiled and nodded. "Of course. Maybe the heavens are really looking after me? Or is it because the five elements world is rotating too fast and has sent the ethereal star nucleus to me?" Burial of Heaven quickly asked. "No. I mean, there's nothing special about this area. It's no different from the other voids. How can you remember it?" Ji Tianxing nodded again and said proudly, "Have you forgotten? Eidetic memory is my innate ability. If I remember correctly, we can see the ethereal star nucleus after we fly 1,000,000 miles to the right." Burial of Heaven said doubtfully, "If that's the case, let's go and take the ethereal star nucleus first. Anyway, you've broken through to the martial sage realm. This time we can take the ethereal star nucleus so that we don't have to make a special trip in the future." Ji Tianxing did not waste any time. He quickly drove Burial of Heaven and flew to the void on the right. About 6 hours later, Burial of Heaven had flown more than 800,000 miles. At this time, Ji Tianxing saw a diamond-shaped meteorite embedded in the golden light shield in front of him. Ji Tianxing was far away. At this time, it seemed that the dark diamond-shaped meteorite was only the size of a boat. However, he knew very well that the illusory spirit star nucleus was at least 10,000 miles long. Fortunately, after 2 to 3 years, the ethereal star nucleus is still here and has not been taken away by others. He murmured with a relieved face and heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. Buried Heaven continued, "Apart from you and the martial god powerhouses, it's impossible for ordinary martial saints to take away this star core." Ji Tianxing nodded and said in a relaxed tone, "No matter what, as long as the ethereal star nucleus is still here, it's fine. Let's go and take it now. When we return to the five elements world, I'll try to smelt it and improve your grade." Burial of Heaven was also full of anticipation and said excitedly, "If I smelt the entire star nucleus of the big world, I can at least advance to the empty god level." The empty god level referred to the martial gods. In the five elements world, the empty god level magic treasure was the top divine weapon. Ji Tianxing did not say anything more. He drove Burial of Heaven through the void and flew toward the ethereal star nucleus. After a short 2 hours, he arrived near the ethereal star nucleus. Observing closely, he found that the ethereal star nucleus had not changed at all. The 10,000-mile-long diamond-shaped crystal nucleus was still inserted in the five elements world and pierced through the golden light barrier. On the other side of the star nucleus, there was a 20,000-mile-long star halo, like an ancient starry path. Swoosh! Ji Tianxing landed on the star nucleus and walked along the dark rocky ground toward the canyon in the middle of the star nucleus. When I entered the canyon, I found the ethereal sacred land at the end of the canyon. It was there that I found the ancient god's Mi star ring, which contained 18 martial sage souls and 1 martial god soul. This time I want to refine the ethereal star nucleus, and I guess I have to go to the sacred land. It's the center of the entire star nucleus and it's the best place to set up a formation. As he spoke, he passed through the canyon and flew toward the ethereal sacred land in the depths of the canyon. After a short quarter of an hour, he arrived at the end of the canyon. 200 miles in front of him was a wide and tall cave entrance. He had fought with the mutant blood god in this place. The ground was still full of cracks left by the sword chi, and there were many piles of broken stones. However, when he raised his head to look at the dark cave entrance, his body stiffened and he was stunned on the spot. He saw 4 golden figures standing on both sides of the wide cave entrance. The 4 figures were all dressed like guards, but they looked a little strange. They were all more than 10 feet tall and had big heads. Their upper bodies were human, but their lower bodies were like lions. They had 4 thick hooves and dark golden manes. Their bodies were as sturdy as millstones and they had 4 thick arms. On their broad chests, there was a basin-sized dark red scale. The scale was like a tortoise shell with lines and lattices. There were also circles of lines in the center. Ji Tianxing observed with great detail. and discovered that the patterns on the chests of the 4 outsiders were all dark golden in color, and there were only 3 circles on each of them. Strange. Why are there alien warriors on the ethereal star nucleus? The 4 aliens look so strange. How come I've never seen them before? At the same time, the 4 alien guards also found him.